The ballroom fell silent the moment she entered. Not because Alara Whitmore was beautiful, though she was, but because everyone knew she had no right to be there. The daughter of a bankrupt viscount, wearing last season's gown with the seams let out twice, she stood at the edge of London's most exclusive gathering like a ghost at a feast. Whispers cut through the music. Fans snapped open to hide cruel smiles. She'd come anyway, because desperation makes you brave or foolish, and tonight Alara couldn't afford to care which. What happened next would either save her family or destroy what little reputation they had left. Stay until the end to see how one impossible choice transforms everything. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The chandeliers of Ashworth House blazed with 1,000 candles, casting golden light across the faces of London's elite. Silk gowns swept across polished marble. Diamonds caught the light at every turn. The air itself seemed perfumed with wealth, thick with the certainty that belonged only to those who'd never known want. Alara Whitmore stood just inside the doorway, one gloved hand pressed against the cool doorframe for balance, and felt the weight of every eye in the room. She'd known it would be like this. Known they would stare. Known they would whisper. But knowing and enduring were different creatures entirely. "Is that the Whitmore girl?" The voice carried from behind a spray of white roses arranged on a nearby pedestal. "I heard her father lost everything in that railway scheme." "Not everything. They still have the house in Cheapside." A pause, laden with significance. Cheapside. Laughter, soft and cutting. Alara's fingers tightened on her reticule. The small beaded bag contained exactly 3 things: a handkerchief, a calling card she had no business distributing, and the last of her pride. She lifted her chin and stepped fully into the ballroom. The gown she wore had been her mother's before consumption took her 3 years ago. Alara had altered it twice, once to fit her taller frame, and again last week when she'd realized the waist needed letting out. The pale blue silk had been exquisite once. Now it was merely respectable. The kind of dress that announced its wearer's circumstances as clearly as a herald's trumpet. She'd debated wearing it at all. Debated coming here at all. But desperation had a way of clarifying one's options. Her younger sister Margaret needed medicine. Her father needed money to pay the creditors circling like wolves. And Alara needed a miracle. "Miss Whitmore." The voice came from her left, smooth and aristocratic. She turned to find Lord Pemberton approaching, his expression a careful blend of sympathy and distance. They danced together once, 2 seasons ago, before everything fell apart. "Lord Pemberton?" She curtsied, measuring the movement perfectly despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "I hadn't expected to see you here tonight." His tone was pleasant, but his eyes flicked toward the doorway, as if already calculating his escape route. Lady Ashworth was kind enough to extend an invitation. It was a lie. Lady Ashworth had done no such thing. But the invitation had arrived anyway, unsigned, with only her name written in elegant script across expensive paper. Alara still didn't know who'd sent it, but she'd come because refusing would have been the wiser choice, and wisdom was a luxury she could no longer afford. How generous of her. Pemberton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "If you'll excuse me, I believe I see Lord Crawford across the room." He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the practiced efficiency of a man avoiding an unpleasant obligation. Alara exhaled slowly and made her way toward the wall, where she could observe without being quite so observed. This was her strategy for these events, honed over 2 years of social humiliation. Smile pleasantly, speak when spoken to, and above all, remain forgettable. She'd become an expert at invisibility. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Couples moved onto the dance floor in a swirl of color and coordinated grace. Alara recognized most of them: Lord and Lady Hertford, the Carmichael twins, young Mr. Blackwood with the shipping fortune. This was her world once, or should have been. Her father's title was old enough, their family name respectable enough. But titles meant nothing when creditors came calling, and respectability crumbled quickly once the money ran out. "Champagne, miss?" A footman appeared at her elbow, offering a tray of crystal flutes. Alara shook her head. She couldn't risk even the smallest indulgence. Every penny mattered now, and besides, drinking on an empty stomach, she'd skipped dinner to save the food for Margaret, would be foolish. No, thank you. The footman moved on. Alara turned her attention back to the dancers, letting the music wash over her. She could leave now, should leave. This had been a mistake coming here. Whatever she'd hoped to accomplish, make a connection, find a benefactor, secure some impossible salvation, it wasn't going to happen. Not here. Not among people who'd already written her off as yesterday's tragedy. You're standing in my favorite spot. The voice was female, older, and carried the kind of authority that made people straighten their spines without thinking. Alara turned to find herself face to face with a woman she recognized immediately, though they'd never been introduced, Marceline Ravencroft, the Dowager Duchess of Ashmont. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken her lady's maid hours to perfect. Her gown was deep burgundy silk, cut in a style that was somehow both current and timeless. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, but it was her eyes, sharp, assessing, missing nothing, that made her truly formidable. Alara dropped into her deepest curtsy. Your Grace, forgive me, I didn't mean to— Oh, stop that. The Dowager Duchess waved a dismissive hand. If I actually wanted you to move, I would have said so directly. I simply meant that you have excellent taste in vantage points. From here, one can observe everything without being trampled by the dancers or suffocated by the crush near the refreshments. Alara straightened slowly, uncertain how to respond. The Dowager Duchess of Ashmont was legendary in society, a woman who'd navigated 4 decades of aristocratic politics with shrewd intelligence and an absolute refusal to suffer fools. She'd outlived 2 husbands, raised 3 children to adulthood, and was rumored to hold more influence than half the men in Parliament. You're Alara Whitmore. It wasn't a question. Yes, Your Grace. Good. I despise ambiguity. The Dowager Duchess studied her with the intensity of a jeweler examining a suspicious diamond. You came alone tonight. I did. Bold. Foolish perhaps, but bold. I appreciate boldness. She paused. You received my invitation, I trust? The world tilted slightly. That was— You sent it? Of course I did. Did you think it materialized from thin air? The Dowager Duchess's mouth curved in something that might have been amusement. I wanted to see if you'd come. If you had the spine to walk into a room full of people who'd gladly watch you drown. The honesty was so unexpected, so brutal, that Alara felt a shocked laugh escape her throat before she could stop it. I see. And have I passed your test, Your Grace? We'll see. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. The Dowager Duchess turned and began moving along the edge of the ballroom, her pace measured but purposeful. Alara followed, acutely aware of the looks they were drawing. Being singled out by Marceline Ravencroft was the social equivalent of being struck by lightning, spectacular, unpredictable, and potentially fatal. They walked in silence until they reached a small alcove partially hidden by an arrangement of potted palms. The Dowager Duchess settled onto a velvet bench with the air of a queen claiming her throne. Sit. Alara sat. Your father lost everything in the Midlands Railway scheme. Again, not a question. Invested everything he had, and a great deal he didn't. The company collapsed, the investors were ruined, and your family has been living on credit and hope ever since. Heat flooded Alara's cheeks, but she didn't look away. That's correct, Your Grace. Your mother died 3 years ago. You have one sister, Margaret, age 14. Clever girl, I'm told, but sickly. The medicine she needs is expensive. You've sold nearly everything of value. Your mother's jewelry, the family silver, even your piano. The Dowager Duchess tilted her head. You play beautifully, I understand. Pity about the piano. How do you— I make it my business to know things, Miss Whitmore. Information is the only currency that never devalues. She folded her hands in her lap. Here's what else I know. You're intelligent, educated, and desperate. You came here tonight because you're running out of options. The creditors are closing in. Your father is in poor health, broken by his failures, and you're tired of being invisible. The words hit like physical blows. Alara forced herself to breathe evenly, to maintain her composure. If you already know everything, Your Grace, why are we having this conversation? Because I have a proposition for you. One that will solve your financial difficulties and serve my purposes as well. The Dowager Duchess leaned forward slightly. I want you to marry my son. Silence crashed down between them. The music from the ballroom seemed suddenly distant, muffled. Alara was certain she'd misheard, but the Dowager Duchess's expression was perfectly serious. I beg your pardon? Adrian Ravencroft, Duke of Ashmont, my eldest son. I want you to marry him. I don't understand. We've never even met. A detail easily remedied. The Dowager Duchess dismissed this with a flick of her fingers. The specifics are these. Adrian stands to inherit a considerable fortune from his late grandfather's estate. However, there's a condition in the will. He must be married by his 35th birthday, or the entire inheritance reverts to his cousin, who is an absolute waste of good tailoring and aristocratic breeding. Alara's mind raced. And when is the Duke's birthday? 6 weeks from now. 6 weeks? Precisely. Adrian has been resistant to the idea of marriage. He's brilliant, stubborn, and entirely too comfortable with the notion of letting the fortune go out of pure spite for his grandfather's manipulations. The Dowager Duchess's tone suggested this was both frustrating and somehow admirable. I've been searching for someone who might change his mind, someone he couldn't easily dismiss or intimidate, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Someone desperate enough to accept, Alara said quietly. Someone brave enough to try. The correction was subtle but firm. I won't lie to you, Miss Whitmore. This would be an arrangement of convenience, a marriage of strategy. But it would be legal, binding, and lucrative. I'm offering you £50,000 to marry my son and remain his wife for 1 year. After that, you're free to seek an annulment or continue as you choose. Your family's debts will be cleared immediately upon the wedding. Your sister will have the best doctors in London, and you will have the protection of the Ravencroft name for as long as you need it. £50,000. The sum was staggering, impossible, enough to save everything. Why me? Alara heard herself ask. There are a dozen women in this room with better connections, better reputations, better prospects? The Dowager Duchess smiled, and it was a sharp, knowing expression. My dear girl, those women want love or status or some romantic fantasy. They would complicate everything with expectations and emotions. You, on the other hand, understand that this is a business transaction. You need money. I need Adrian married. It's refreshingly simple. And the Duke? Does he know about this plan? Not yet, but he will. I intend to introduce you tonight. The Dowager Duchess stood, smoothing her gown. I suggest you decide quickly, Miss Whitmore. Opportunity has a terrible habit of evaporating when one hesitates too long. Alara's thoughts churned. This was insane. Marrying a complete stranger, a duke no less, in some elaborate scheme to secure his inheritance? It was the plot of a penny novel, not a real possibility. And yet, £50,000, Margaret's medicine. The creditors, finally, blessedly silent. A future that didn't involve watching everything they had left slip away piece by piece. If I agree, she said slowly, standing to face the Dowager Duchess, what happens if the Duke refuses? What happens if he won't go through with it? Then you'll have wasted an evening and gained an interesting story, but you'll be no worse off than you are now. The Dowager Duchess extended her hand. 1 year of your life, Miss Whitmore, in exchange for security and freedom. That's the bargain. Will you take it? Alara looked at the offered hand, thought of her father, lost in grief and debt, thought of Margaret, struggling to breathe on bad days, her medicine bottle growing lighter, thought of herself, standing on the edges of ballrooms, invisible and powerless. She'd come here tonight with nothing. She'd stood in this room and endured their stares and their whispers because she had no other choice. Maybe she still didn't, or maybe, just maybe, this was the choice that mattered. She clasped the Dowager Duchess's hand. I'll take it. The older woman's smile was triumphant. Excellent. Come with me. It's time you met your future husband. They crossed the ballroom together, and this time Alara didn't care about the stairs. The whispers seemed distant, irrelevant. Her heart pounded with something that felt dangerously close to hope, or perhaps terror. It was difficult to tell the difference. The Dowager Duchess led her through a doorway into a quieter corridor, lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. They walked past two footmen around a corner and stopped before a heavy oak door. "He's in the library," the Dowager Duchess said. "Reading, no doubt. He finds these events insufferable and escapes at the first opportunity." She pushed the door open without knocking. "Adrian, stop hiding and come meet your bride." The library was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive fireplace, furniture that looked both expensive and comfortable. And standing near the window, a book in one hand, was a man who could only be the Duke of Ashmont. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. His evening clothes were impeccably tailored but somehow disheveled, as if he'd been wearing them too long and stopped caring about their perfection. His face was striking rather than handsome. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes that were currently fixed on his mother with an expression of profound annoyance. "Mother, what are you—" He stopped as his gaze shifted to Alara. "Who is this?" "Alara Whitmore," the Dowager Duchess said cheerfully. "Your future wife. Don't scowl. It's unbecoming." "My what?" The Duke's voice was low, controlled, but Alara could hear the steel beneath it. "Your wife. You're going to marry her in 6 weeks or lose your grandfather's fortune to that idiot cousin of yours. Miss Whitmore has agreed to the arrangement. I've handled all the tedious details. You simply need to not be obstinate about it." The Duke closed his book with deliberate care and set it on the windowsill. When he looked at Alara again, his expression was impossible to read. "You agreed to this?" It wasn't quite a question, but Alara answered anyway. "I did, Your Grace." "Why?" The single word held layers of meaning. Alara met his gaze directly. "Because your mother made me an offer I couldn't afford to refuse. Because my family is drowning in debt. Because I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Is that honest enough for you?" Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "And you understand this would be a marriage in name only, a contractual arrangement." "I understand perfectly." "You're willing to tie yourself to a stranger for money." "I'm willing to make a strategic choice for survival," Alara corrected, "which is what you'd be doing as well, Your Grace, so perhaps we can dispense with the moral judgment." The Dowager Duchess made a small, pleased sound. "I told you she had spine." The Duke ignored his mother, his attention still focused entirely on Alara. He crossed the room toward her with long, measured strides. She forced herself not to step back, to hold her ground even as he stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to maintain eye contact. "You have no idea what you're agreeing to," he said quietly. "This family, this life, it's not romantic or simple. There will be scrutiny, expectations, complications you can't imagine." "I'm not looking for romance, Your Grace. I'm looking for a solution, as are you. And after a year, when the inheritance is secured and you've fulfilled your part of the bargain, then we go our separate ways, unless we mutually decide otherwise." He studied her for a long moment. Alara wondered what he saw. The desperate daughter of a ruined viscount, an opportunist, a survivor? Finally, he stepped back. "Very well. If we're going to do this absurd thing, we should at least be honest with each other. I don't want a wife. I don't want my grandfather's money. But I'll be damned if I let it go to Cousin Edmund." He glanced at his mother. "I assume you've already drawn up contracts." "Naturally. My solicitor will have them ready by morning." "Of course he will." The Duke turned back to Alara. 1 year, a marriage of pure strategy, public unity, private distance. We'll play our parts convincingly enough to satisfy the will in society. After that, you're free. Those are my terms." "Agreed," Alara said. Her voice was steady even as her mind reeled. This was happening. This was actually happening. "Then we have an arrangement, Miss Whitmore." He extended his hand and she shook it. His grip was firm, warm, and entirely impersonal. "Welcome to the Ravencroft family. I suspect we'll both regret this eventually." "Probably," Alara agreed. "But at least we'll regret it with our eyes open." The Dowager Duchess clapped her hands together once, sharply. "Excellent. I'll announce the engagement at the end of the evening. Adrian, try to look less like you're attending a funeral. Miss Whitmore, We'll need to get you properly outfitted before the wedding. Can't have my daughter-in-law looking like she shops at a second-hand market." Alara should have been insulted. Instead, she almost laughed. The whole situation was so surreal, so impossible, that normal emotional responses seemed inadequate. "I should return to the ballroom," she said. "People will notice I've been gone." "Let them notice." The Dowager Duchess waved dismissively. "You're about to become a duchess. Start acting like it." The Duke, Adrian, she supposed she should think of him as, made a sound that might have been agreement or exasperation. "I'll escort you back," he said. "We might as well begin the performance." He offered his arm. Alara took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his coat. They walked together back toward the ballroom, the Dowager Duchess following at a discreet distance. "You don't have to do this," Adrian said quietly, pitched for her ears alone. "It's not too late to change your mind. My mother is formidable, but she can't force you into anything." "Neither can you," Alara replied. "I made my choice, for better or worse. For money. For survival, there's a difference." They reached the ballroom entrance. The music still played. The dancers still whirled. Nothing had changed in the world except everything had changed for her. Adrian paused at the threshold. "One more thing, Miss Whitmore. If we're going to be husband and wife, even in name only, I need to know you won't lie to me. Strategy, distance, formality, fine, but not lies. Can you agree to that?" Alara looked up at him, this stranger she was about to marry, and saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but a kind of weary intelligence that suggested he'd been disappointed too many times to trust easily. "No lies," she agreed, "on one condition." "Which is?" "The same honesty from you." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Deal!" They entered the ballroom together, and Alara felt the shift in attention like a physical force. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The daughter of a ruined family, walking arm in arm with one of the most powerful men in England. She lifted her chin and smiled, and this time it wasn't the careful, invisible smile she'd perfected over 2 years of humiliation. This time it was the smile of a woman who'd just made the boldest gamble of her life. The Dowager Duchess would announce the engagement within the hour. Tomorrow, the gossip would spread like wildfire. And in 6 weeks, Alara Whitmore would become the Duchess of Ashmont. She had nothing left to lose. And perhaps, just perhaps, everything to gain. The announcement sent shockwaves through London society that lasted precisely 3 days before transforming into something far more dangerous. Speculation. Alara stood in the drawing room of Ravenscroft House, watching raindrops trace patterns down the tall windows while voices drifted up from the entrance hall below. Another delivery. More gifts from people who wanted to curry favor with the future Duchess of Ashmont, or perhaps from those who wanted to inspect the merchandise up close. "The Countess of Berkshire has sent her card," Mrs. Holloway, the head housekeeper, announced from the doorway. "She requests the honor of calling on you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. "The Countess of Berkshire called my family unfortunate to her face last season," Alara said without turning from the window. "Tell her I'm indisposed." "Very good, miss." There was approval in the older woman's tone. Mrs. Holloway had been with the Ravenscroft family for 30 years and had apparently decided that Alara's refusal to grovel before society was a point in her favor. The wedding was 4 weeks away now, 4 weeks of fittings and meetings with solicitors and learning the labyrinthine rules of a household that operated like a small kingdom. The Ravenscroft estate wasn't just a home. It was an institution, complete with hierarchies Alara was only beginning to understand. She'd moved into the house 3 days after the engagement was announced, partly for propriety's sake, and partly because her father's creditors had wasted no time attempting to leverage her new status. The Dowager Duchess had handled them with brutal efficiency, paying off every debt and making it abundantly clear that any further harassment would result in consequences. "Your family is under Ravenscroft protection now," she'd told Alara over breakfast that first morning. "That means the vultures will find other prey." Margaret had cried with relief when the doctor confirmed he could continue her treatment without concern for payment. Her father had simply sat in his study, staring at nothing, as if he couldn't quite process how their fortunes had reversed so completely. "You're brooding." Alara turned to find Adrian standing in the doorway, still in his riding clothes, dark hair windswept. He'd been out since dawn, avoiding the parade of well-wishers and gift-bearers with the dedication of a man evading the plague. "I'm thinking," she corrected. "Same thing." He crossed to the sideboard and poured himself a drink, then hesitated. "Do you want one?" "It's 11 in the morning." "Yes, and we're about to endure another tedious dinner with people who want to dissect our arrangement like amateur surgeons. I'd say that warrants brandy, regardless of the hour." Despite herself, Alara smiled. "No, thank you." Adrian shrugged and took a long swallow from his glass. They'd fallen into an odd rhythm over the past 2 weeks, polite distance punctuated by moments of surprising candor. He was easier to talk to than she'd expected, though he maintained careful boundaries. No personal questions, no discussions about feelings or futures beyond the contractual year they'd agreed to. It should have been comfortable. Instead, it left her oddly restless. "The Marchioness of Weatherby is hosting a dinner party tonight," she said. "Your mother insists we attend." "Of course she does." Adrian set down his glass. "Weatherby's husband sits on 3 important committees. Mother never misses an opportunity for strategic positioning. You don't have to come if you'd rather not. And let you face them alone? That would defeat the entire purpose of this arrangement." He studied her with those sharp, assessing eyes. "Besides, I'm curious to see how you handle Lady Weatherby. She has a talent for making people feel inadequate with a single glance." "Then we'll get along splendidly," Alara said dryly. "I've had 2 years of practice." Something shifted in his expression, not quite sympathy, but understanding. "The cream silk gown," he said abruptly. "The one that arrived yesterday. Wear that tonight." "Why?" "Because it's beautiful and expensive, and it will make them remember that you're about to become a duchess." "Armor, Miss Whitmore. When you walk into a room full of predators, you wear armor." He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. Alara turned back to the window, considering his words. Armor. Yes, she understood that. She'd been wearing different versions of it for years. The pleasant smile, the careful manners, the art of being overlooked. But perhaps it was time for a different kind of defense. That evening, she descended the main staircase in the cream silk gown Adrian had mentioned. It fit perfectly, thanks to the small army of seamstresses the Dowager Duchess had employed. The neckline was modest but elegant, the fabric catching the light with every movement. Diamonds, borrowed from the Ravencroft collection, glittered at her throat and ears. Adrian was waiting in the entrance hall, and when he looked up, something flickered across his face too quickly to identify. "Well?" Alara asked, raising an eyebrow. "You'll do," he said, but his tone suggested something closer to approval. The carriage ride to Weatherby House took 20 minutes through rain-slicked streets. They sat across from each other in silence until Adrian suddenly spoke. "They'll try to separate us tonight, the men to the smoking room, the women to discuss whatever it is women discuss when we're not present. Lady Weatherby will ask you questions designed to make you uncomfortable." "What sort of questions?" "About your family, your father's debts, how you managed to secure an engagement to a duke when you were practically destitute." He watched her carefully. "How will you answer?" Alara considered this. "With the truth? That your mother saw an opportunity and I was desperate enough to take it. That this is a business arrangement, not a love match. That I have no illusions about my place here. That's honest." "You asked for honesty." "I did." Adrian leaned back against the cushioned seat. "But honesty can be a weapon, Miss Whitmore. These people will use your words against you if they can. They'll twist them, repeat them, turn them into ammunition. Then let them. I'd rather be honest and condemned than false and accepted." The corner of his mouth lifted. "You might actually survive this after all." Weatherby House was ablaze with lights, carriages lined up along the street disgorging London's elite. Alara took Adrian's arm as they ascended the steps, acutely aware of the looks they drew. The impossible couple, the fortune hunter, and the reluctant duke. She could practically hear the thoughts. Lady Weatherby greeted them in the entrance hall, a tall woman with iron-gray hair and the posture of a military general. "Your Grace, Miss Whitmore, how delightful." The word delightful carried the warmth of a January frost. "Lady Weatherby," Adrian said smoothly, "thank you for the invitation." I wouldn't dream of celebrating without London's most talked-about couple. Lady Weatherby's gaze swept over Alara with calculating precision. That's a lovely gown, my dear. Quite a change from your usual, simpler attire. The Ravencroft family has been generous, Alara replied evenly. I'm sure they have. Come, we're gathering in the drawing room before dinner. The drawing room was already full of guests, their conversations creating a low hum of polite noise. Alara recognized most of them, the same faces she'd seen at countless events over the years, the same people who'd watched her family's decline with voyeuristic interest. Miss Whitmore. Lady Pemberton materialized at her elbow, all false warmth and sharp curiosity. We were just discussing your upcoming nuptials. Such an unexpected development. Life is full of surprises, Alara said. Indeed. I was just saying to Lord Pemberton that we hadn't even realized you and the Duke were acquainted. We weren't, not until recently. The admission created a ripple of interest among the nearby listeners. Lady Pemberton's smile sharpened. How romantic! A whirlwind courtship. Actually, it was quite practical. Alara kept her voice light, conversational. The Duke needed a wife. I needed security. His mother facilitated an introduction. We found our goals aligned. The drawing room had gone noticeably quieter. Adrian, engaged in conversation with Lord Weatherby across the room, glanced her way with an expression she couldn't quite read. How modern, Lady Pemberton said faintly. I think it's refreshing, another voice cut in. Lady Caroline Ashford, a widow in her 40s known for her sharp wit and disregard for convention, joined their small circle. All these love matches that turned sour after a year. At least Miss Whitmore and the Duke are honest about their arrangement. Honest, Lady Pemberton repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it unpleasant. Brutally so, from what I hear. Lady Caroline smiled at Alara. I admire that. Most women your age are still pretending they married for affection when everyone knows they married for money or title. You're not even bothering with the pretense. Why should I? Alara asked. We all know how this world works. Marriage is a transaction. Some people dress it up in poetry and romance. I prefer clarity. Clarity? Lady Caroline laughed. I like you, Miss Whitmore. You're going to cause quite a stir as a duchess. Dinner was announced before Lady Pemberton could formulate a response. They filed into the dining room, an elaborate affair with a table that could seat 30. Alara found herself placed between Lord Ashford, a portly gentleman more interested in his wine than conversation, and Mr. Thaddeus Crawford, a young MP with political ambitions written across his face. Adrian sat across and 3 seats down, too far for private conversation, but close enough that she could catch his eye occasionally. Each time she did, she saw the same carefully neutral expression, as if he were watching a play and hadn't yet decided whether to be entertained or concerned. I understand you're quite accomplished at the pianoforte, Miss Whitmore, Mr. Crawford said as the first course was served. I was. We had to sell the piano. The bluntness clearly surprised him. Ah, I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. It was sold to a family who'll actually play it, better than sitting silent in an empty house. Still, it must have been difficult, letting go of something you loved. Alara met his gaze steadily. Mr. Crawford, I've let go of many things I loved. You learn to carry on regardless. He had no response to that. The conversation shifted to safer topics. The weather, the upcoming parliamentary session, the scandal involving Lord Somebody's son, and an actress. Alara participated when directly addressed, but mostly listened, cataloging information the way the Dowager Duchess had taught her. Information is currency, the older woman had said. Learn what people want, what they fear, what they'll trade for, then use it wisely. It was halfway through the 4th course when Lady Weatherby, seated at the head of the table, turned her attention directly to Alara. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, how are you finding Ravencroft House? I imagine it's quite different from what you're accustomed to. Every conversation around them paused. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, the chance to watch the desperate girl from the ruined family be put in her place. It's magnificent, Alara said, though I confess the number of servants took some adjustment. I'd grown used to managing with far fewer. I'm sure you had. Lady Weatherby's smile was razor sharp. One must adapt to circumstances, though I wonder, do you think you'll adapt to the responsibilities of being a duchess? It's quite demanding, you know. Not everyone is suited to such a position. The implication was clear. You're not suited to this position. Alara set down her fork with deliberate care. I think, Lady Weatherby, that I've spent the last 2 years managing a household with no money, nursing a sick sister, and watching my father deteriorate from grief while keeping up appearances before people who took great pleasure in our suffering. If I can survive that, I suspect I can manage the responsibilities of a duchess. Silence fell across the table like a dropped curtain. Well said, Lady Caroline murmured. Adrian was watching her now with undisguised interest, something that might have been respect in his eyes. Lady Weatherby's expression had frozen into a mask of polite displeasure. I meant no offense, my dear. Of course not, Alara said smoothly. Just as I'm sure you meant no offense when you told Lady Pemberton last season that my family's situation was a cautionary tale about ambition exceeding wisdom. I'm certain that was simply honest observation, not cruelty. The color drained from Lady Weatherby's face. You did, actually, at the Hartford's garden party. I was standing behind the rose trellis. You didn't see me. Alara picked up her wineglass. But I heard you perfectly. The atmosphere had shifted from awkward to electric. Mr. Crawford looked like he wanted to applaud. Lord Ashford had stopped eating entirely, his attention riveted. And Adrian was fighting a smile. I apologize if my memory makes things uncomfortable, Alara continued, her tone pleasant, as if discussing the weather. But you did ask how I'll manage as a duchess. The truth is, I've had excellent practice in navigating hostile environments. This dinner party, for instance, is considerably less challenging than facing creditors with no money to pay them. Lady Weatherby opened her mouth, closed it, and reached for her wine. The conversation resumed gradually, but the tone had changed. People addressed Alara with more care now, measuring their words. She'd drawn blood, and they'd taken note. After dinner, the women did indeed retire to the drawing room while the men disappeared to smoke and discuss politics. Alara found herself surrounded by curiosity, disguised as concern. That was quite bold, Lady Caroline said quietly, settling beside her on a settee. You've made an enemy of Lady Weatherby. I made an enemy of Lady Weatherby the moment I became engaged to a duke while being the daughter of a ruined viscount, Alara replied. At least now she knows I won't be an easy target. No, I don't imagine you will. Lady Caroline studied her thoughtfully. The duke is a fortunate man, whether he realizes it yet or not. The duke is fulfilling a contractual obligation, as am I. Of course. But Lady Caroline's smile suggested she didn't quite believe that. An hour later, the men rejoined them. Adrian appeared at Alara's side with 2 glasses of champagne, offering her one. You've caused quite a stir, he said quietly. Your mother told me to stop being invisible. I'm simply following instructions. She'll be pleased. She appreciates a good tactical strike. He paused. That comment about the creditors. That was true. Every word. I know. That's what made it effective. Adrian's expression was difficult to read. You're not what I expected, Miss Whitmore. What did you expect? Someone more pliable, someone who'd play the role and disappear into the background. Would you have preferred that? He considered the question seriously. I'm not sure, but I'm beginning to think this arrangement might be less tedious than I anticipated. They left shortly after, making their excuses to a still flustered Lady Weatherby. The carriage ride back to Ravenscroft House was quiet until Adrian suddenly laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. What? Alara asked. You eviscerated her. Politely, elegantly, but thoroughly. He shook his head. I've attended hundreds of these dinners. That was the most entertaining one in years. I may have overstepped. You established boundaries. There's a difference. Adrian leaned forward slightly. Listen, Miss Whitmore. Alara. If we're going to survive this year together, I need to know you won't crumble under pressure. Tonight you proved you won't. That's valuable. The use of her first name was unexpected, intimate in a way their previous interactions hadn't been. Adrian, she said, testing his name. Are you saying you approve? I'm saying you might actually be suited to this after all. Whether that's a comfort or a concern, I haven't decided yet. The carriage pulled up to Ravencroft House. Adrian helped her down, his hand warm through her glove. They stood for a moment in the entrance hall, rain pattering against the windows, the house quiet around them. "Thank you," Alara said, "for the advice about the gown, about armor." "You're welcome, though I suspect you would have managed without it." "Perhaps, but it helped to know someone was—" She paused, searching for the right word. "On your side?" Adrian supplied. "We're allies, Alara. This arrangement works only if we support each other, at least in public. And in private? In private, we maintain our distance, as agreed." But something in his voice suggested the boundary wasn't quite as firm as it had been 2 weeks ago. He bid her good night and disappeared toward his study. Alara climbed the stairs to her room, her mind churning. The next morning brought a flurry of calling cards, some from people outraged by her behavior at dinner, others from those intrigued by it. The Dowager Duchess appeared at breakfast with a stack of invitations. "You're suddenly quite popular," she announced. "Lady Ashford wants you for tea. The Duchess of Somerset is hosting a garden party and specifically requested your attendance. And Lord Blackthorne, he's influential in banking circles, wants to invite you and Adrian to dinner next week. Because I insulted Lady Weatherby? Because you demonstrated you're not a doormat. People respect strength, my dear, even when they resent it." The Dowager Duchess sat down across from her. "How are you finding Adrian?" The question was casual, but Alara sensed calculation behind it. "He's been courteous, helpful even." "Helpful?" The older woman's eyebrow arched. "How lukewarm. I had hoped you two might actually like each other." Liking wasn't part of the arrangement. No, but it would make the next year considerably more pleasant. The Dowager Duchess poured herself tea. "My son is brilliant, stubborn, and entirely too comfortable with solitude. His grandfather's will infuriated him because it forced his hand. He doesn't like being manipulated. Neither do I. No, I don't imagine you do, which is precisely why I chose you." She stirred sugar into her tea with precise movements. "Adrian needs someone who'll challenge him, someone he can't intimidate or dismiss, someone who understands that marriage, even one built on strategy, requires partnership." "You're asking a great deal for £50,000. I'm asking you to be yourself. The woman who faced down Lady Weatherby last night. The woman who walked into a ballroom full of people who wanted her to fail and decided to gamble everything instead." The Dowager Duchess met her gaze directly. "Don't hide that person now that you have security. Adrian responds to strength, not submission." Alara thought about this as the days passed. Her interactions with Adrian had settled into a routine. Breakfast together, where they discussed the day's agenda, occasional dinners when there were no social obligations, and long evenings in the library where they read in companionable silence. It was during one of those library evenings, 2 weeks before the wedding, that everything shifted. Alara was reading a political treatise Adrian had recommended, making notes in the margins, when he suddenly spoke from his chair across the room. "Why did you really agree to this?" She looked up, surprised. "You know why. The money. My family's debts. That's the practical reason. But there's more, isn't there?" He set down his own book. "You could have found other solutions. A governess position, a teaching post. You're educated, capable. You didn't have to sell yourself in marriage. Those positions pay barely enough to survive, let alone save a family drowning in debt. And sell myself is rather dramatic, don't you think? We made a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Did we?" Adrian leaned forward, his expression intense. "Or did you take the only escape route offered, regardless of the cost?" Alara closed her book carefully. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because in 2 weeks we'll be married. Because I'm beginning to think I should know more about the woman who's about to become my wife than her financial desperation." "And what about you?" Alara challenged. "Why did you really agree? You claim you don't want your grandfather's money, yet here we are. You could have refused, let Cousin Edmund have the fortune, but you didn't." Adrian stood crossing to the window. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the lamplight from the street beyond. "Because refusing would have been letting him win. My grandfather was a controlling, manipulative bastard who tried to orchestrate my life from beyond the grave. I won't give him the satisfaction of making me choose poverty over principle." "So this is about pride. Isn't everything?" He turned to face her. You agreed to this arrangement to save your family. I agreed to it to spite a dead man and an unworthy cousin. We're both acting out of something other than pure logic. Then perhaps we're well matched after all. They stared at each other across the library, something unspoken crackling in the air between them. Then Adrian smiled, a real smile, not the polite mask he wore in public. Perhaps we are. The moment stretched, then broke as the clock chimed 11. Adrian glanced toward the sound. It's late. You should rest. We have the Blackthorns' dinner tomorrow night, and you'll need your strength to navigate that particular den of vipers. More predators? Always. But his tone was almost affectionate. Sleep well, Ilara. You too, Adrian. She left the library but paused in the corridor, her heart beating faster than it should. Something had changed tonight. Some boundary had been crossed, subtle but significant. It should have worried her. Instead, she felt oddly exhilarated. The Blackthorns' dinner proved every bit as challenging as Adrian had predicted. Lord Blackthorn was a shrewd banker who asked pointed questions about Adrian's business investments. His wife was a social climber who alternated between flattering Ilara and making thinly veiled comments about her background. But they navigated it together. When Lord Blackthorn pressed Adrian about a recent financial decision, Ilara smoothly redirected the conversation. When Lady Blackthorn made a cutting remark about marrying above one's station, Adrian responded with a defense of Ilara so sharp and immediate that the entire table fell silent. My fiancée, he said, his voice carrying clear authority, has more intelligence and courage than most of the titled families in this room. Her circumstances are the result of her father's bad judgment, not her own failings. Anyone who suggests otherwise will find themselves unwelcome in my home. The message was received. Lady Blackthorn offered a stammering apology. The rest of the evening proceeded with considerably more caution from their hosts. In the carriage afterward, Ilara turned to Adrian. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. We're partners in this. That means defending each other. He met her gaze. Besides, everything I said was true. You are intelligent and courageous, and I won't tolerate anyone suggesting otherwise. Even though this is just an arrangement, a marriage of strategy, Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Even so. But something in his voice made her wonder if he was trying to convince himself as much as her. The wedding was now 1 week away. The preparations had reached a fever pitch, final fittings, endless meetings with the caterers, arguments with the florist about arrangements. Through it all, Ilara and Adrian maintained their careful balance of partnership and distance, until the night they attended the theater together and everything began to unravel. It was meant to be a simple evening, a new production of Hamlet that Adrian wanted to see. They arrived at their box to find it positioned directly across from another box where Cousin Edmund and his wife held court. Edmund Ravencroft was everything Adrian wasn't, smooth, charming, and hollow. His wife Charlotte was a beautiful woman with calculating eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. "Cousin," Edmund called across the theater, his voice carrying over the crowd. "How lovely to see you, and the infamous Miss Whitmore. How are the wedding preparations proceeding?" "Smoothly, thank you," Adrian replied coolly. "I'm sure they are. Nothing like the promise of a fortune to expedite romance." Edmund's grin was all teeth, though I must say the timing is rather convenient. One might almost think this was a strategic marriage rather than a love match. "One might think many things," Ilara said before Adrian could respond, "though thinking and understanding are quite different, aren't they, Mr. Ravencroft?" Edmund's smile faltered slightly. "Clever. Adrian always did appreciate clever women. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what will you do with yourself once you've secured the Duchess title? Return to your simpler pursuits?" "I plan to continue doing exactly what I'm doing now," Ilara replied evenly. "Managing a household, supporting my husband, and ignoring people who mistake rudeness for wit." Charlotte laughed, a genuine sound. "She has you there, darling." Edmund's expression darkened. "Just remember, cousin, that some fortunes aren't worth the cost of acquiring them. A year is a long time to maintain a pretense." Before Adrian could respond, the lights dimmed for the performance. But the damage was done. Adrian spent the entire first act rigid with barely contained anger, his jaw clenched so tight Ilara worried he might crack a tooth. At intermission, she touched his arm gently. "Ignore him. He's trying to provoke you." He succeeded. Adrian stood abruptly. "I need air. Excuse me." He disappeared into the corridor before Alara could stop him. She remained in the box, acutely aware of Edmund's gaze from across the theater. When the lights dimmed again for the second act, Adrian still hadn't returned. She found him after the performance ended, standing in a quiet corner of the lobby, staring at nothing. "Adrian?" He turned and she saw something raw in his expression. Anger, yes, but also something deeper. Doubt, perhaps, or regret. "This was a mistake," he said quietly. Alara's heart stuttered. What was? "All of it. The arrangement, the wedding, dragging you into my family's dysfunction." He ran a hand through his hair. "Edmund's right. This is a pretense, a strategy, and you're caught in the middle of it." "I chose to be caught in the middle of it," Alara said firmly. "I walked into this with my eyes open." "Did you? Or did you just take the only escape you thought you had?" She thought of the library conversation weeks ago, this same question asked in a different context. But now it felt heavier, weighted with implications she didn't want to examine. "Does it matter?" she asked. "We made an agreement. In 6 days, we'll be married. Everything else is irrelevant." "Is it?" Adrian stepped closer, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. "Because I'm starting to think that pretending indifference might be harder than I anticipated." The admission hung between them, dangerous and electric. Alara knew she should step back, maintain the distance they'd agreed upon. Instead, she held her ground. "Then perhaps," she said quietly, "we should stop pretending altogether." "And do what instead?" "Be honest. Not just about the practical aspects of this arrangement, but about everything else. What we think, what we want, what we're afraid of." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually guarded face. "You're right. No more pretense. Between us, at least." "Between us," Alara agreed. They returned to Ravencroft House in thoughtful silence, but it was different now. Not the careful distance of strangers maintaining boundaries, but the comfortable quiet of two people who'd reached an understanding. As they stood in the entrance hall, about to part for the night, Adrian caught her hand. "Alara, thank you." "For what?" "For not being what I expected. For being more." He released her hand and disappeared up the stairs, leaving Alara standing alone in the lamplight, her heart racing with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The 5 days before the wedding passed in a blur of final preparations and stolen moments that felt increasingly dangerous. Adrian had taken to joining Alara for breakfast every morning, their conversations ranging from politics to poetry to heated debates about parliamentary reform that left them both energized and laughing. The careful distance they'd maintained had eroded into something neither of them could name, but both felt acutely. On the morning of the wedding rehearsal, Alara woke to discover she'd been bleeding. Not heavily, but enough to send ice through her veins. She'd missed her courses twice now, attributed it to stress, but the physician the Dowager Duchess summoned confirmed what Alara had been trying desperately not to consider. "You're with child, Your Grace," Dr. Morrison said, using the title she wouldn't officially hold for another 3 days. "Perhaps 6 weeks along. The spotting is concerning but not necessarily dangerous. Complete bed rest for the next week and we'll monitor closely." Alara sat frozen in her bedroom, the words echoing in her mind like cannon fire. Pregnant. She was pregnant. It was impossible. She and Adrian had never even kissed, let alone... Understanding crashed over her with nauseating clarity. The night she'd moved into Ravencroft House, she'd been so exhausted she'd fallen asleep in the library. She'd woken the next morning in her own bed with no memory of how she'd gotten there, and there had been wine at dinner that night. Too much wine, because she'd been nervous and the Dowager Duchess had kept refilling her glass. No. That couldn't be what happened. Adrian wouldn't. He'd given his word. They had an agreement. He was honorable, even if he was stubborn. And, "Miss Whitmore?" Dr. Morrison's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Do you understand what I've told you?" "Yes." The word came out strangled. "Does anyone else know?" "Only myself and Mrs. Holloway, who summoned me. I'll need to inform the Dowager Duchess, of course, and the Duke." "No." Alara stood on shaking legs. Not yet. I'll tell him myself after the rehearsal. Dr. Morrison looked dubious but nodded. As you wish, but he must be informed soon. This changes certain aspects of the arrangement. Changes everything, Alara thought numbly. Because a marriage of convenience was one thing. A marriage with a child who would inherit the Ravencroft name and fortune, was something else entirely. She dressed mechanically, her mind racing. The rehearsal was in 2 hours, the wedding itself in 3 days. And she was carrying a child she couldn't remember conceiving with a man who'd promised her distance and strategy, not intimacy. There had to be an explanation. There had to be. The church was cold despite the June sunshine streaming through the stained glass windows. Alara walked through the motions of the rehearsal in a daze, acutely aware of Adrian's presence beside her. He looked concerned, kept asking if she was well, and she kept lying that she was fine. "You're pale," he murmured during a pause in the proceedings. "Should I call for a physician?" "I've already seen one." The words escaped before she could stop them. Adrian's expression shifted to alarm. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" "No, I'm—" She glanced around at the assembled witnesses, the Dowager Duchess, the vicar, Edmund and Charlotte watching from a rear pew with vulture-like interest. "Can we speak privately? After this?" "Of course." His hand found hers, warm and steady, and the gesture made her want to weep. "Whatever you need." But before they could finish the rehearsal, the church doors banged open with enough force to echo off the vaulted ceiling. A man Alara didn't recognize strode down the aisle, his expression thunderous, a sheaf of papers clutched in one fist. "Adrian Ravencroft," the man announced, his voice carrying. "I have a writ from the Crown Court. You're being sued for breach of contract." The temperature in the church seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian's hand tightened painfully on Alara's before he released it and turned to face the intruder. "Mr. Hardwick, how unexpected." His tone was ice. "And how dramatic. This could have been handled through my solicitor." "Your solicitor has been avoiding my correspondence for 3 weeks." Hardwick thrust the papers toward Adrian. "You owe my client, Lord Hartwell, £60,000 from a failed shipping venture. Payment was due last month. We're prepared to seize assets if necessary." Alara's stomach lurched. £60,000. More than the inheritance, more than— "That debt was settled 2 years ago," Adrian said coldly. "Hartwell knows that perfectly well. He disputes the settlement, claims the documentation was fraudulent." Hardwick's smile was ugly. "The court date is set for 2 weeks from now. I suggest you retain counsel." He left as abruptly as he'd arrived, leaving the papers on the nearest pew. The silence in the church was suffocating. Edmund rose from his seat, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes gleaming. "How unfortunate, cousin. Right before your wedding, too. One might almost think Hartwell's timing was strategic." "One might think," Adrian replied softly, "that Hartwell had help with his timing." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you've been trying to undermine this marriage since it was announced, whispering in the right ears, calling in old debts, manufacturing crises." Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Edmund's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something vicious underneath. "I think you're paranoid, cousin, and I think your desperation to secure grandfather's fortune has made you reckless. Marrying a fortune hunter, fighting baseless legal battles, it doesn't reflect well." "Edmund," the Dowager Duchess's voice cracked like a whip. "That's enough. Leave. Now." "Of course, Mother," Edmund sketched a mocking bow. "I'll see you all at the wedding, assuming it still proceeds given these complications." Charlotte followed him out, throwing one poisonous glance over her shoulder. The vicar excused himself with stammering apologies about needing to prepare for another service. Within minutes, only Alara, Adrian, and the Dowager Duchess remained in the empty church. "How bad is this?" the Dowager Duchess demanded. Adrian picked up the papers, scanning them with grim focus. "Bad. Hartwell's claiming the settlement I arranged was never properly witnessed. If the court agrees, I'll owe the full amount plus interest, which would be—" He did rapid calculations. "Approximately £70,000. Can you pay it?" "Not without selling property, and not quickly enough to prevent asset seizure." Adrian's jaw tightened. Edmund knew this. He's been planning it. That's why he's been so confident about getting the inheritance. Then we fight it, the Dowager Duchess said. We find the original documentation. We prove the settlement was legitimate. The documentation was destroyed in a fire at my solicitor's office last year. I have copies, but they're not legally binding without the originals and witness testimony. Adrian looked at his mother. And the witnesses are either dead or unreachable. Hartwell chose his moment well. Alara's mind was spinning. The wedding was in 3 days. Adrian was being sued for a sum that would bankrupt him. Edmund was orchestrating everything, and she was pregnant with a child that shouldn't exist. We postponed the wedding, she heard herself say. Both Adrian and his mother turned to stare at her. Absolutely not, the Dowager Duchess said. That's exactly what Edmund wants. He's trying to prevent the marriage, prevent you from securing the inheritance. We move forward exactly as planned. With Adrian facing a lawsuit that could destroy him? With everyone in London watching to see if we collapse under pressure? Alara shook her head. This isn't sustainable. It has to be. Adrian's voice was raw. Because if we postpone, if we show any weakness, Edmund wins. The inheritance reverts to him, and I'll still be facing this lawsuit with no resources to fight it. Then fight it after the wedding, after you have the inheritance. And drag you into a legal battle? Make you a duchess just in time to watch everything crumble? Adrian laughed bitterly. That wasn't the arrangement, Alara. You agreed to a year of strategy, not a lifetime tied to my family's dysfunction. The arrangement, Alara said carefully, has already changed. The words hung in the air between them. Adrian's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? This was it. The moment she had to tell him. Alara drew a breath, feeling the weight of the secret she'd been carrying for mere hours but felt like years. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was absolute. The Dowager Duchess made a small, sharp sound of surprise. Adrian went utterly still, his face draining of color. That's impossible, he said finally. Apparently not. I've never touched you. His voice rose slightly. This is some kind of mistake. The physician was wrong. Dr. Morrison is the best in London. He's not wrong. Alara forced herself to meet Adrian's eyes. And I know we've never, but there was that first night, the night I moved in. I fell asleep in the library and I woke up in my bedroom with no memory of how I got there. Adrian's expression shifted from shock to horror to fury in rapid succession. You think while you were asleep, you actually believe I don't know what to believe. The words burst out of her, sharp with desperation. I can't remember, and now I'm pregnant, and nothing makes sense. I carried you to your room, Adrian said, his voice shaking. You'd had too much wine at dinner, you fell asleep reading, and I carried you upstairs and left you with Mrs. Holloway to help you change. I didn't touch you. I gave you my word, Alara. I have never broken my word. The raw pain in his voice cut through her panic. She believed him. Somehow, despite everything, she believed him. Then how? I don't know. Adrian turned to his mother. Is this your doing? Some scheme to ensure the marriage? The Dowager Duchess had gone very quiet, her calculating expression firmly in place. Don't be absurd. I arranged a marriage of convenience, not this. Then someone did. Adrian's hands clenched into fists. Someone who wanted to ensure we couldn't walk away from this arrangement. Someone who knew a child would bind us permanently. Edmund. The thought occurred to all three of them simultaneously. But how? And when? The engagement ball, Alara said slowly, her mind racing back. I felt dizzy after the champagne. I thought it was nerves, but what if someone drugged you? Adrian finished grimly. Edmund was there. He had access to the drinks, and he had motive. If you ended up pregnant before the wedding, it would be a scandal. I'd be forced to marry you immediately or face social ruin. But that doesn't explain... Alara stopped, horror dawning. Unless he planned for something to happen that night. Unless he arranged for someone to... She couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too monstrous. The Dowager Duchess stood abruptly. We need to speak with Edmund, now. If he's orchestrated something this vile, we have no proof, Adrian interrupted. Only suspicion. And accusing him without evidence will only make things worse. Then what do you suggest? His mother demanded. Adrian looked at Alara, and she saw the decision forming in his eyes before he spoke. We proceed with the wedding as planned. We don't let Edmund see that this has rattled us, and we investigate quietly, find out what actually happened that night, and who's responsible. And the child? Alara's voice was barely a whisper. Is mine. The words were fierce, final. Legally, socially, in every way that matters. No one can prove otherwise, and no one will question it once we're married. You can't just... You didn't sign up for this. For a real marriage, a real child. Adrian crossed to her in 3 strides, catching her hands in his. Listen to me. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know how this is possible. But I know that someone is trying to destroy us, and I will not give them the satisfaction. If there's a child, then we face it together, as partners, as we agreed. That's not what we agreed? Then we're changing the terms. His grip tightened. Unless you want to walk away. I won't hold you to the arrangement if you want out. The offer was genuine. Alara could see it in his eyes. He would release her from the contract, deal with Edmund and the lawsuit and the scandal alone, rather than trap her in a situation she didn't choose, which made her decision very simple. I'm not walking away, she said. We face this together. Relief flickered across Adrian's face. Then he released her hands and turned to his mother. Make sure Dr. Morrison keeps this quiet. No one can know about the pregnancy yet. And start investigating the engagement ball. I want to know everyone who had access to the drinks, everyone who spoke to Alara, everything. The Dowager Duchess nodded, already moving toward the church door. I'll handle it. You two go home. Rest. We have a wedding in 3 days, and it needs to be flawless. She swept out, leaving Alara and Adrian alone in the empty church. I'm sorry, Alara said into the silence, for suspecting you, for thinking you could... Don't. Adrian's voice was weary. You had every reason to question what happened. We barely know each other, and the circumstances are... He trailed off, shaking his head. Insane doesn't begin to cover it. No, it doesn't. They stood there for a long moment, the afternoon light painting gold across the stone floor between them. Then Adrian offered his arm. Come on, let's go home. We have a great deal to figure out. The carriage ride back to Ravencroft House was silent, both of them lost in thought. Alara's hand kept drifting to her stomach, still flat, showing no signs of the life growing inside. A child. She was going to be a mother. The idea was terrifying and surreal in equal measure. We'll need to adjust the contract, Adrian said suddenly. The original terms were for 1 year. With a child, that's no longer feasible. What are you suggesting? A permanent arrangement, a real marriage, at least in practical terms. Separate bedrooms if you prefer, but a united front publicly and privately. The child will be raised as a Ravencroft heir. No annulment, no divorce. You want to bind yourself permanently to this situation? To me? Adrian turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. I want to do what's right, and that means providing for this child and protecting you both from whatever machinations Edmund has planned. That's very noble. But what about what you want? What I want, Adrian said slowly, is to stop feeling like a pawn in someone else's game. And the only way to do that is to take control of the situation, which means marrying you, securing the inheritance, and dealing with Edmund once and for all. In that order? In exactly that order. They arrived at Ravencroft House to find chaos. The Dowager Duchess had already set her network of informants into motion, and the entrance hall was full of servants receiving rapid-fire instructions. Mrs. Bums. Holloway appeared with tea and sympathy, ushering Alara upstairs with firm insistence that she needed to rest. Dr. Morrison's orders, the housekeeper said. You're to stay in bed for the next week. No arguments. But the wedding will proceed perfectly well without you running yourself ragged over details. Mrs. Holloway helped her into bed with the efficiency of long practice. The Dowager Duchess has everything under control. Your job is to rest and take care of yourself and that baby. The baby. Alara's hand went to her stomach again as Mrs. Holloway left. A baby who shouldn't exist. A baby who changed everything about the careful arrangement she'd made. A baby who made her vulnerable in ways she'd never anticipated. She must have dozed because when she woke, the room was darker and Adrian was sitting in the chair by her bedside, reading by lamplight. How long have you been there? She asked, her voice rough with sleep. He looked up, setting the book aside. "An hour or so. I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine. Just tired." Dr. Morrison said the fatigue is normal. He also said the spotting has stopped, which is good news. Adrian hesitated. "Mother's been investigating. She found something interesting." Alara struggled to sit up, her heart racing. "What?" Edmund had a private conversation with Lord Pemberton's son at the engagement ball. Pemberton Jr. is known for his, shall we say, flexible morality. He's been involved in several scandals, always managing to escape consequences through family connections. "You think Edmund paid him to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the horror of it. "I don't know, but Mother's people are looking into it. If there's evidence, we'll find it." Adrian's jaw tightened. "And if Edmund orchestrated this, if he arranged for something to happen to you, I will destroy him. Legal protections be damned." The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in months. "We need to be careful," she said. "If we accuse Edmund without proof—" "I know. We wait. We gather evidence, and then we strike when he's not expecting it." Adrian leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But I need you to understand something, Alara. This isn't just about the inheritance anymore. Someone violated you, used you as a pawn, and I will not let that stand. This isn't your battle to fight alone. It's not a battle at all. It's a war, and we're going to win it." The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended state. Alara remained in bed under Dr. Morrison's watchful care while the household prepared for the wedding. Adrian visited frequently, bringing books and news and an increasingly grim determination. The Dowager Duchess's investigation was progressing, but slowly. They had suspicions, but no solid proof. On the morning of the wedding, Alara woke to find Margaret sitting beside her bed, tears streaming down her face. "Alara, you don't have to do this," her sister said. "If you're only marrying him because of me, because of the debts—" "I'm not." Alara caught Margaret's hand. "I'm marrying him because it's the right choice, for both of us." "But you're scared. I can see it." "I'm terrified," Alara admitted. "But that doesn't mean it's the wrong decision." Margaret hugged her tightly, careful of her still fragile condition. "Promise me you'll be happy, or at least try to be." "I promise to try." The ceremony was set for 3 o'clock. Alara dressed in the gown the Dowager Duchess had commissioned, white silk with delicate lace, elegant and expensive, and nothing like anything she'd ever owned. Margaret helped arrange her hair while Mrs. Holloway fussed over the veil. "You look like a duchess," Margaret whispered. "I feel like an imposter." "Then fake it until it's true. Isn't that what you've been doing all along?" Alara laughed despite her nerves. "When did you become so wise?" "I've had an excellent teacher." The church was full when Alara arrived, every pew packed with London society come to witness the spectacle. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, his hand trembling against hers. At the altar, Adrian waited in formal dress, his expression carefully neutral until their eyes met. Then something shifted, a flash of genuine emotion too quick to identify. The vicar began the ceremony. Alara spoke her vows in a clear voice, hearing Adrian echo them with equal steadiness. They were binding themselves together with words and witnesses, making permanent what had been meant to be temporary. "You may kiss the bride," the vicar announced. Adrian leaned down, his hands gentle on her shoulders, and kissed her with a tenderness that took her breath away. It was brief, chaste, perfectly appropriate for a church wedding, and it felt like a promise neither of them had agreed to, but both suddenly wanted to keep. The reception was held at Ravenscroft House, a lavish affair that would be discussed in society for months. Alara moved through it in a daze, smiling and accepting congratulations while her mind churned. She was married now, legally bound, the Duchess of Ashmont in more than name. It was during the toasts, when Adrian's business partner was making a lengthy speech about investment opportunities, that Alara saw Edmund. He was standing near the terrace doors, speaking in low, urgent tones to another man. The conversation looked heated, almost argument. Then Edmund glanced her way and smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent ice down her spine. He knows about the pregnancy, she realized with sudden certainty. Somehow, he knows. She must have made a sound because Adrian appeared at her elbow immediately. "What's wrong?" "Edmund. He's..." But when she looked again, Edmund had disappeared into the crowd. "I saw him," Adrian said grimly. "He's planning something. I can feel it." They didn't have to wait long to find out what. At precisely 8 o'clock, as the guests were beginning to depart, Edmund appeared at the center of the ballroom and called for attention. "A moment, please," he announced, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I have something important to share. A toast to the happy couple, if you will." Adrian's hand found Alara's under the table, squeezing tight. "To my dear cousin Adrian," Edmund continued, raising his glass, "who has finally found a woman willing to overlook his considerable flaws in exchange for his considerable fortune, and to his lovely bride Alara, who has managed the impressive feat of going from destitute to duchess in mere weeks. Truly, it's a modern fairy tale." Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. The Dowager Duchess stood, her expression thunderous, but Edmund wasn't finished. Of course, fairy tales often have darker truths beneath the surface. For instance, I've recently learned something fascinating about the timeline of this romance. He paused for effect. It seems the Duchess may have been carrying the Duke's heir before the wedding even took place. How efficient. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, shocked exclamations. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Adrian shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. "That's a lie," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Is it?" Edmund's smile widened. "Because I have a physician who examined the Duchess 3 days ago. Dr. Morrison confirmed a pregnancy of approximately 7 weeks, which would place conception around the time of your engagement ball. How romantic." "Edmund," the Dowager Duchess's voice was deadly, "you will retract that statement immediately." "I'm simply sharing facts, Mother." "Facts that suggest this marriage was rather more necessary than romantic." Edmund turned to address the room at large. "It makes one wonder, doesn't it, whether the Duke married for love or simply to avoid scandal?" Adrian was moving before anyone could stop him. He crossed the ballroom in long strides, seized Edmund by the collar of his jacket, and slammed him against the nearest wall with enough force to rattle the paintings. "You orchestrated this," Adrian snarled. "You arranged for something to happen to her at the engagement ball. You're responsible for this entire situation." "I have no idea what you're talking about." Edmund's voice was strained but triumphant. "Though it's interesting that you're not denying the pregnancy." "Because there's nothing to deny. My wife is carrying my child, our child. And if you spread one more lie about her, I will end you." "Adrian," Alara's voice cut through the rage. She'd stood, was moving toward him on unsteady legs, acutely aware of every eye in the room watching. "Let him go." "He violated you. He used you. I will not—" "Let him go," she repeated firmly. "This is what he wants, a scene. Evidence of instability. Don't give it to him." Adrian's grip tightened for one more second, then released. Edmund straightened his jacket, his smile never wavering. "Such passion," he said mockingly. "One might almost believe you actually care for her, cousin, rather than simply needing her to secure your inheritance." "Get out," Adrian said quietly. "Get out of my house. You're no longer welcome here. Ever." Edmund sketched a bow. "As you wish. But the damage is done, I'm afraid. By tomorrow all of London will know that the Duke and Duchess of Ashmont entered marriage under rather scandalous circumstances. I do hope it was worth it." He left, Charlotte trailing behind him with a satisfied smirk. The remaining guests began making hurried excuses, departing as quickly as propriety allowed. Within 20 minutes, the ballroom was empty except for Alara, Adrian, and the Dowager Duchess. "Well," the older woman said into the silence, "that could have gone better." Adrian turned to Alara, his expression raw. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have lost control like that. I've made everything worse." "You defended me," Alara said simply. "No one's done that in a very long time." "It doesn't matter if half of London now thinks we're embroiled in scandal." "Let them think what they want." Alara lifted her chin. "We know the truth. That's what matters." But even as she said it, she knew the damage was catastrophic. Edmund had turned their wedding day into a spectacle, had made their private situation horrifyingly public. The gossip would be merciless, the social consequences severe, and they still had no proof of what he'd done. The Dowager Duchess excused herself to deal with damage control, leaving Alara and Adrian alone in the empty ballroom. The decorations that had looked so festive hours ago now seemed almost mocking, celebrations of a marriage that everyone would assume was born of desperation and scandal. "We need to find proof," Adrian said finally. "Evidence of what Edmund did. It's the only way to clear your name. And yours. I don't care about mine, but I will not let him ruin you." Adrian turned to face her fully. "Alara, I need to know something. That night at the engagement ball. Do you remember anything? Anything at all?" She closed her eyes, trying to force her mind back through the fog of memory. The champagne, the dizziness, and then something. A fragment. "There was a man," she said slowly. "Young, well-dressed. He offered to help me find a place to sit when I felt faint. I remember his hand on my arm, leading me somewhere. And then, nothing. Just darkness until I woke up the next morning." Adrian's expression had gone very still. "Can you describe him?" "Dark hair. Perhaps 25. He had a signet ring on his left hand, gold with a blue stone." "That's Pemberton Jr." Adrian's voice was tight with fury. "Edmund's friend. The one Mother mentioned. You think he's the one who—" "I think he's exactly the one. And I think Edmund paid him to do it." Adrian began pacing, his movement sharp with barely contained rage. "We need to prove it. Find witnesses. Get Pemberton to confess somehow." "How? Men like that don't confess. They're protected by their families, their connections. Then we find another way." Adrian stopped pacing, his eyes meeting hers. "I promise you, Alara, we will find out what happened that night, and we will make them pay for it." The vow hung in the air between them, fierce and absolute. Alara believed him. Which was perhaps the most surprising thing of all, that somewhere in the past weeks she'd started trusting this man she'd married for money and strategy. A man who'd just become her husband in truth, not just in name. A man who was looking at her now with an intensity that made her heart race. "Alara," he said quietly, "I know this isn't what you signed up for. The scandal, the pregnancy, the complications. If you want—" "I'm not going anywhere," she interrupted. "We're in this together. That's what you said. I'm holding you to it." "Even though I just made us the center of the biggest scandal London's seen in years?" "Even though." She managed a small smile. "Besides, I'm starting to think scandal might be preferable to invisibility." Adrian laughed, a surprised sound that transformed his face. "You're remarkable. Do you know that?" "I'm stubborn. There's a difference." "No, you're remarkable." He closed the distance between them, his hand lifting to cup her cheek with unexpected gentleness. "And I'm starting to think this arrangement might be the best decision I've ever made." The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Then Adrian's hand dropped, and he stepped back. "You should rest. It's been a long day." "What will you do?" "Start investigating. Pemberton lives in Mayfair. I'm going to pay him a visit." "Adrian, it's nearly midnight, and if he's dangerous, then it's better I confront him now, while he's not expecting it." Adrian's expression had gone cold, calculating. "Don't worry. I'm not going to do anything reckless. Just have a conversation, man to man." He left before she could argue further. Alara stood alone in the empty ballroom, her wedding dress suddenly feeling heavy, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her shoulders. She was pregnant with a child she couldn't remember conceiving, married to a man she was beginning to care for in ways she hadn't planned, and caught in the middle of a war between cousins that was growing more dangerous by the hour. The door opened. Alara turned, expecting Mrs. Holloway, or perhaps the Dowager Duchess. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man she didn't recognize. He was perhaps 30, dressed in servant's livery, but something about his eyes was wrong, too calculating, too cold. "Your Grace," he said, and his smile made her skin crawl. "I have a message for you, from a friend." "What friend?" "Mr. Edmund Ravenscroft. He wanted me to tell you that you should reconsider your position in this family, before something unfortunate happens to you or your child." Terror spiked through her. "Get out, now!" "I'm just delivering a message, Your Grace, but perhaps you should consider it carefully. Accidents happen. especially to women in your delicate condition. His gaze dropped to her stomach. It would be such a shame if something went wrong. He was threatening her baby. Alara's hand moved to her stomach protectively, her mind racing. If she screamed, someone would come. But by then, he could... The man must have seen the calculation in her eyes, because his smile widened. Smart girl. Don't do anything rash, just think about what I've said. And remember, Edmund always wins in the end. He left as silently as he'd arrived, disappearing into the darkened corridor beyond the ballroom. Alara stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. Edmund wasn't just trying to ruin their reputation. He was willing to hurt her, hurt the baby, to get what he wanted. She needed to tell Adrian, needed to warn him that this had escalated beyond scandal into something far more dangerous. But Adrian had gone to confront Pemberton, and she was alone in a house full of servants, any one of whom might be working for Edmund. Alara looked around the empty ballroom, at the remains of her wedding celebration, and realized with crystal clarity that the real battle was just beginning, and she had no idea if they were going to survive it. Alara stood frozen in the empty ballroom for exactly 10 seconds after the man disappeared. Then her survival instincts, honed through 2 years of navigating catastrophe, kicked in with brutal clarity. She couldn't trust the servants, couldn't trust anyone in this house except possibly Mrs. Holloway and the Dowager Duchess. And Adrian was gone, confronting Pemberton with no idea that Edmund had just escalated from scandal to direct threats. She moved quickly, gathering her skirts and heading for the main staircase. The house was quiet now, most of the staff dismissed after the disastrous reception. Her footsteps echoed on marble as she climbed, her mind racing through options. The Dowager Duchess would be in her private study. She always retreated there after significant events to strategize. Alara needed to reach her, tell her about the threat, and figure out how to warn Adrian before he walked into something worse than he anticipated. She was halfway down the second-floor corridor when she heard voices, low, urgent, coming from a room with the door slightly ajar. Alara slowed, pressing herself against the wall. "Told you to be subtle," the Dowager Duchess's voice, sharp with anger. "I was as subtle as the situation allowed." A male voice, unfamiliar. Edmund's man was already in the house. I had to intercept the message before it reached the Duchess. What message? A threat. Against her and the child. Edmund's trying to frighten her into leaving. Silence. Then the Dowager Duchess spoke again, her tone deadly. "Show me." Alara heard paper rustling. Her heart hammered. Someone had intercepted Edmund's threat? But who, and why hadn't they told her? "This is more dangerous than I anticipated," the Dowager Duchess said finally. "Edmund's not just playing for the inheritance anymore. He wants them destroyed completely." "Should I inform the Duke?" "No. Adrian's volatile enough already. If he knows Edmund threatened Alara directly, he'll do something rash." A pause. "Where is he now?" "On his way to Pemberton's residence. I have men following at a distance." "Good. Make sure they intervene if things get violent. The last thing we need is Adrian arrested for assault." The Dowager Duchess's voice hardened. "And find out who Edmund's man in the house is. I want him identified and removed by morning." Alara stepped back carefully, her mind spinning. The Dowager Duchess had people following Adrian, had intercepted Edmund's threat, was running some kind of counter-operation that neither she nor Adrian knew about. She should have been angry at the manipulation. Instead, she felt a strange rush of relief. They weren't alone in this. The Dowager Duchess was fighting back, using her own networks and resources. But that didn't solve the immediate problem. Adrian was still walking into potential danger, and Edmund was still threatening her child. Alara made a decision. She turned and headed not toward the Dowager Duchess's study, but toward Adrian's private office. If he kept business correspondence there, he might also keep other useful information. Documents about Edmund, evidence they could use. The office was unlocked. Adrian never bothered securing it within his own home. Alara slipped inside and lit a lamp, surveying the organized chaos. Papers covered the massive desk, stacked in neat piles that suggested a mind that processed multiple complex matters simultaneously. She began searching, careful to maintain the organization. Financial records, correspondence with his solicitor about the Hartwell lawsuit, Letters from business associates? Nothing about Edmund specifically. Nothing that... Her hand stilled on a leather folder tucked beneath a stack of parliamentary reports. Inside were newspaper clippings, all about Edmund. Society gossip mostly, but also some more serious articles. A mention of a gambling debt paid unusually quickly, a reference to a business venture that failed suspiciously, and a notation in Adrian's handwriting, "Ask Mother about the Westbrook incident." The Westbrook incident. Alara had heard that name somewhere. She closed her eyes, forcing her memory back through years of social gossip. Westbrook. Westbrook. Something about a scandal, a young woman, a family paying to keep things quiet. The door opened behind her. Alara spun, her heart leaping into her throat, but it was only the Dowager Duchess. "I thought I might find you here," the older woman said, closing the door quietly. "You heard our conversation." "Some of it. You have people following Adrian." "Of course I do. He's my son and he's walking into danger. Did you think I'd simply let him face Edmund alone?" The Dowager Duchess crossed to the desk, glancing at the folder in Alara's hands. "Ah, you found his research on Edmund. What's the Westbrook incident?" The Dowager Duchess's expression went carefully neutral. 3 years ago, Edmund was involved with a young woman named Catherine Westbrook. Merchant class, intelligent, beautiful. She became pregnant. Edmund denied responsibility and her family was too poor to fight him. She died in childbirth. The baby died 3 days later. Horror washed over Alara. And nothing was done? Edmund's father paid the family to keep quiet, gave them enough money to emigrate to America. The Dowager Duchess's voice was bitter. "I only learned about it 2 years ago, after my husband died. By then, the Westbrooks were gone and there was no proof, just rumors and a suspicious amount of money changing hands. So he's done this before, used women as pawns, destroyed lives for his own gain. Yes, which is why I won't let him do it again." The Dowager Duchess met Alara's gaze directly. "I know about the threat he made tonight. The man who delivered it has been dealt with. He's currently locked in the wine cellar, and he'll be answering some very pointed questions shortly, but I need you to stay calm, stay safe. Let me handle Edmund. I'm not hiding while Adrian's in danger. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to be strategic." The Dowager Duchess gestured to the folder. "Adrian's been investigating Edmund for months, collecting evidence, following trails, but he's been doing it alone, keeping me at a distance because he doesn't want to implicate me if things go wrong. That ends now. We work together, all 3 of us. You want to tell him you've been running your own investigation? I want to combine our efforts before someone gets killed." The Dowager Duchess's tone was grim. "Because Edmund is escalating. The lawsuit was meant to drain Adrian's resources. The scandal was meant to isolate you socially, but threats against your life, against an unborn child, that's desperation, which makes him more dangerous than ever." Alara set down the folder with careful precision. "Then we need to move faster, find the proof we need, and expose him before he can do more damage." "Agreed, but first we need to make sure Adrian doesn't get himself arrested, or worse, at Pemberton's residence." The Dowager Duchess moved toward the door. "Come, my carriage is faster than his, and I know a shortcut." They moved through the house quickly, the Dowager Duchess issuing rapid instructions to Mrs. Holloway about securing the premises. Within minutes, they were in the carriage, racing through London's nighttime streets toward Mayfair. "What exactly is Adrian planning to do?" Alara asked as they took a corner with enough speed to make her grab for the handhold. "Confront Pemberton about what happened at the engagement ball. Demand answers. Possibly break the man's nose if he doesn't cooperate." The Dowager Duchess's tone suggested she wouldn't particularly object to the last option. "My son has many virtues, but patience under pressure isn't one of them. He defended me tonight, against Edmund, in front of everyone." "He did, which was both admirable and tactically inadvisable." The Dowager Duchess glanced at her. "You're changing him, you know, making him care about something beyond spite and principle. I'm not sure if I should thank you or warn you about the consequences." "The consequences?" "Adrian doesn't do anything halfway. If he's decided to protect you, he'll burn the world down to do it. That kind of intensity can be powerful. It can also be dangerous." The carriage pulled up outside an elegant townhouse in the heart of Mayfair. Lights blazed in the upper windows despite the late hour. As they climbed out, Ilara saw another carriage parked nearby, Adrian's. They were too late to stop the confrontation, but perhaps not too late to control the damage. The Dowager Duchess knocked sharply on the front door. A bewildered butler answered, took one look at her imperious expression, and stepped aside immediately. "Where are they?" she demanded. "The study, Your Grace, but I should warn you." Whatever warning he intended to give was cut off by the sound of breaking glass from upstairs. The Dowager Duchess was moving before the last shard hit the floor, Ilara right behind her. They found Adrian and Pemberton in what had once been a well-appointed study. Now it looked like a battlefield, furniture overturned, papers scattered, and Pemberton backed against his desk with blood streaming from his nose, while Adrian stood over him with murder in his eyes. "Tell me what happened that night," Adrian was saying, his voice deadly quiet. "Tell me exactly what Edmund paid you to do." "I don't know what you're talking about." Adrian's fist slammed into the desk beside Pemberton's head, making the man flinch. "You were seen. Multiple witnesses place you with my wife at the engagement ball, shortly after she accepted champagne, shortly before she lost consciousness. So I'll ask again, what did Edmund pay you to do?" "Adrian," the Dowager Duchess's voice cut through the violence like a blade. "Step back." "Mother, this doesn't concern—" "Step back now, or I will have you removed from this room." The steel in her tone was absolute. "We need information, not a corpse and a murder charge." Adrian's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. Pemberton slumped with visible relief, wiping blood from his face with a trembling hand. The Dowager Duchess moved forward with predatory grace. "Mr. Pemberton, you have one chance to tell the truth. What happened at the engagement ball?" "I didn't—" Edmund said it was just a prank. He said the Duchess would be fine, that nothing would happen. "What did you do?" Each word was enunciated with precise fury. Pemberton's composure cracked completely. "I put something in her drink, just to make her dizzy, disoriented." Edmund said he wanted to embarrass the Duke, make him look bad for not taking care of his fiancée properly. "I swear I didn't know. I never would have. What was in the drink?" Adrian's voice was barely recognizable. "Laudanum. Just a small amount. Enough to make her confused, suggestible." Pemberton looked between them desperately. "But I swear, I just helped her to a private room to rest, that's all. I left her there and went back to the party. I never touched her. I never—" "What room?" Ilara spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the tension. All three of them turned to look at her, as if they'd forgotten she was there. "What room did you take me to?" "The blue drawing room. The one near the terrace. There was a couch. I thought you could sleep it off." "Who else knew about this?" the Dowager Duchess demanded. "Just Edmund. He planned the whole thing, but I swear he said nothing would happen. He said it was just to humiliate the Duke, prove he wasn't fit to protect a wife." Pemberton's voice was rising with panic. "I didn't know there would be consequences. I didn't know she'd end up pregnant." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "You knew," Adrian said softly, dangerously. "Edmund told you what he was planning." "No, he said he'd arranged for someone to visit her, to have a conversation while she was disoriented, to plant some seeds of doubt about the marriage." Pemberton was babbling now, terror overriding discretion. "He said it would be harmless. Just talk. Nothing physical. Nothing—" "Who?" Ilara's voice was steel. "Who did he arrange to visit me?" "I don't know. Some associate of his. Someone he trusted to handle it delicately." "That's what he said. Handle it delicately." Pemberton looked at her, his face ashen. "I swear, if I'd known he meant something else, if I'd realized—" Adrian moved so fast, Ilara barely saw it. He had Pemberton by the throat, lifting him half off the ground. "You drugged my wife and left her unconscious for Edmund's associate to assault. And you expect us to believe you had no idea what would happen?" "Adrian, let him go," the Dowager Duchess said sharply. "We need him coherent." "I need him dead." "No, you need him alive and willing to testify." The Dowager Duchess moved to Adrian's side, her hand on his arm. "Think, Adrian, this is evidence. This is proof of Edmund's involvement. We can use this." Adrian's grip tightened for one more second, then released. Pemberton collapsed against the desk, gasping for air. "Write it down," the Dowager Duchess ordered. "Everything, every detail of your conversation with Edmund. Every step of what happened that night. Names, times, amounts of money exchanged. All of it. Edmund will kill me if I... Edmund will be in prison if you cooperate. Or you can refuse, and Adrian will kill you right now. Your choice." Pemberton looked at Adrian's expression and made the obvious decision. He scrambled for paper and pen with shaking hands. Elara watched him write, her mind churning through the implications. Edmund had planned this. Drugged her, arranged for someone to assault her while she was unconscious, created the pregnancy that had trapped them both. But who? Who had Edmund trusted with something so vile? The Dowager Duchess seemed to be thinking the same thing. "Mr. Pemberton," she said quietly, "this associate of Edmund's, man or woman?" "Man. That's all I know. Edmund was careful not to mention a name where I could hear it." Pemberton kept writing, his hand moving across the page in rapid, desperate strokes. "But I got the impression it was someone Edmund had leverage over, someone who owed him a favor and couldn't refuse." Someone Edmund had leverage over. Elara's mind raced through the possibilities. Edmund's social circle was large, but his trusted associates were few. He collected people he could control, people with secrets he could exploit. "Did Edmund seem worried about this person being caught?" Adrian asked, his voice still tight with fury. "The opposite. He seemed confident the man would never talk, said he had too much to lose." Pemberton finished writing and thrust the papers toward the Dowager Duchess. "That's everything I know. I swear it." The Dowager Duchess scanned the pages with rapid efficiency, then nodded. "This will do, for now." She folded the confession carefully. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, you'll meet with my solicitor and provide formal testimony. If you attempt to leave London or warn Edmund, I will ensure you spend the rest of your life in debtor's prison. Do we understand each other?" Pemberton nodded frantically. They left him cowering in his destroyed study. The carriage ride back to Ravencroft House was silent, all three of them processing what they'd learned. Finally, Adrian spoke. "Edmund arranged for someone to assault you while you were unconscious. Created the pregnancy deliberately. This wasn't an accident, it was orchestrated from the start." "Yes," Elara's voice was steady despite the horror churning in her stomach. "Which means somewhere in London there's a man who violated me and thinks he got away with it." "We'll find him," the Dowager Duchess said flatly. "Edmund's confidence will be his undoing. He thinks his leverage is absolute, but everyone breaks eventually." "How do we make Edmund break?" Adrian asked. "We don't. We make his associates break first." The Dowager Duchess pulled out Pemberton's confession. "This is the beginning. We now have proof that Edmund drugged Elara. That's attempted poisoning at minimum, possibly conspiracy to commit assault. We take this to the authorities." "No." Elara surprised herself with the force of her objection. Both Adrian and his mother turned to stare at her. "If we go to the authorities now, Edmund will find out. He'll destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, use his family connections to bury everything. We need more before we move publicly." "What are you suggesting?" Adrian asked. "We use what we know to set a trap. Make Edmund think he's won, that we're broken and desperate. Then when he gets comfortable, when he makes a mistake, we strike." The Dowager Duchess studied her with something approaching approval. "You're thinking tactically. Good. What specifically do you propose?" Elara's mind was racing, pieces falling into place with sudden clarity. "Edmund expects us to fight back openly, to rage and accuse and make ourselves look unstable. Instead, we do the opposite. Tomorrow, I make a public appearance looking calm and gracious. We host the dinner party we had planned for next week, as if nothing happened. We act like Edmund's revelations didn't touch us." "That will infuriate him," Adrian said slowly. "He'll escalate." "Exactly. And when he does, we'll be ready. We document everything, build an airtight case, and when we finally move against him, it will be devastating and complete." Adrian looked at his mother. "Could it work?" "It's risky. If Edmund realizes what we're doing—" "He won't," Elara interrupted, "because he thinks I'm weak, a desperate fortune hunter who married for money. He doesn't expect me to fight strategically. None of them do." "She's right," the Dowager Duchess said after a moment. Society has underestimated her from the beginning. We can use that. She tapped the confession. I'll have this copied and secured in multiple locations, and I'll put pressure on some of Edmund's other associates. See who else might be willing to turn on him if offered the right incentives. They arrived back at Ravencroft House to find Mrs. Holloway waiting with news that the man from the ballroom, Edmund's messenger, had talked under interrogation. He'd confirmed Edmund sent him, confirmed the threat, and provided names of 2 other men on Edmund's payroll who'd been instructed to monitor Alara's movements. They're all locked in the cellar, Mrs. Holloway reported, and singing like birds now that they realize they're facing criminal charges. Keep them comfortable but contained, the Dowager Duchess ordered. We'll need their testimony eventually. Adrian walked Alara up to her bedroom, his hand warm on her back. At her door, he paused. You were remarkable tonight, he said quietly. The way you took control developed a strategy. You're not the woman I thought I was marrying. Neither are you the man I expected. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I nearly killed Pemberton. If Mother hadn't stopped me. But she did, and now we have evidence instead of a corpse. Alara met his gaze steadily. Adrian, I need to know. When we find out who Edmund sent to that room, when we have a name, what will you do? Whatever you want me to do. His voice was rough with emotion. This is your decision, your justice to claim. I want him to face consequences, real ones, not just death in a back alley. Then that's what we'll arrange. Adrian's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I'm sorry, for all of it, for not protecting you better that night, for not realizing sooner what Edmund was capable of. You didn't know, neither did I. She leaned into his touch without thinking. But we know now, and we're going to destroy him for it. Something fierce and protective flared in Adrian's eyes. Yes, we are. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. Alara didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste ceremony at their wedding. This was heat and fury and a promise of violence to come. When they broke apart, both breathless, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling for you, he said, the words barely audible. I know that wasn't the arrangement. I know we agreed to distance, but I don't want to pretend anymore. Alara's heart stuttered. Adrian? You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, whatever we find out about that night, you're not alone in this. You'll never be alone again. He kissed her forehead and left before she could respond, disappearing down the corridor toward his own rooms. Alara stood at her door for a long moment, her fingers pressed to her lips, her mind whirling. She was falling too. Had been falling for weeks without admitting it. This man who defended her, protected her, saw past the desperation to the strength beneath. A marriage of strategy had become something neither of them planned, something real and fierce and worth fighting for. She went inside and found Margaret asleep in the chair by her bed, clearly having waited up despite the late hour. Alara woke her gently. You should be in your own room, she whispered. I wanted to make sure you were safe. Margaret's eyes were huge in the lamplight. Mrs. Holloway told me about the man, about Edmund's threats. I'm safe. Adrian and the Dowager Duchess are handling it. Are you really pregnant? The direct question caught Alara off guard, but Margaret deserved honesty. Yes. How? You and the Duke barely know each other. As understanding dawned in Margaret's eyes, followed by horror. Someone hurt you. Yes, but we're going to find out who and make them pay for it. Alara squeezed her sister's hand. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Always. Margaret hugged her fiercely. What do you need me to do? Go home tomorrow. Stay with Father. Keep each other safe until this is over. You're sending me away? I'm protecting you. Edmund's dangerous. The less time you spend near me, the safer you'll be. Margaret looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. After Margaret left, Alara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her hand on her stomach. A child was growing there. A child created through violence and violation. She should hate it, should want nothing to do with the reminder of what Edmund had orchestrated. Instead, she felt fiercely protective. This child hadn't asked to be created this way, and she would be damned if she let Edmund use it as a weapon. The next morning, Alara appeared at breakfast looking serene and perfectly groomed. The Dowager Duchess raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as Alara calmly discussed plans for the week's social engagements. "The dinner party," Alara said, spreading jam on her toast with steady hands. "We'll proceed as planned, 30 guests. I'll handle the seating arrangements personally." "You're sure about this?" Adrian asked carefully. He looked like he hadn't slept, shadows under his eyes. "Absolutely. We're not hiding. We're not ashamed. We're going to show Edmund and all of London that we're unbreakable." Within hours, word spread through society that the Duke and Duchess of Ashmont were hosting a dinner party as if their wedding reception hadn't ended in scandal. The response was immediate and divided. Some expressed outrage at their audacity, others grudging admiration. Lady Caroline Ashford sent a note. "I'll attend. Someone needs to watch this spectacular disaster or triumph unfold. I'm betting on triumph." The Dowager Duchess's investigation continued quietly. More of Edmund's associates were identified and pressured. A pattern emerged. Edmund had been building a network of compromised individuals for years. Men with gambling debts, women with scandalous pasts, anyone he could control. 3 days before the dinner party, they got their break. A man named Thomas Garrett came to Ravencroft House in the middle of the night, demanding to speak with Adrian. He was one of Edmund's business associates, someone the Dowager Duchess had identified as potentially vulnerable. Adrian and Alara met him in the library. Garrett was perhaps 40, well-dressed but sweating despite the cool evening. "Edmund's planning something," he said without preamble. "Something big. He's been meeting with unsavory people, talking about final solutions and permanent removals." "Meaning what exactly?" Adrian's voice was dangerous. "Meaning he's done playing games. He wants you dead, both of you, and he's willing to hire professionals to make it happen." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Adrian's expression went absolutely cold. "When?" he asked. "Soon. Maybe the dinner party. Maybe before. I don't know exactly." Garrett looked between them desperately. "Edmund has leverage on me, a debt I can't repay, but I won't be party to murder. That's not... I have lines I won't cross." "What does Edmund have on you?" the Dowager Duchess asked. She'd entered silently during Garrett's confession. "Gambling debts. £50,000. He bought the notes from my creditors, said he'd forgive them if I did favors for him occasionally." "What kind of favors?" Garrett's expression twisted with shame. "Information mostly, business intelligence, but recently he's been asking for more. Wanted me to arrange an accident. Nothing specific, just be ready when he gave the word." "And you agreed?" Adrian's voice was lethal. "I said I'd think about it. Bought time. But he's getting impatient, threatening to call in the debt if I don't cooperate." Garrett pulled papers from his coat. "I brought these, copies of correspondence with Edmund, proof of his plans. I want immunity, protection, and my debt forgiven." The Dowager Duchess took the papers, scanning them rapidly. Her expression grew grimmer with each page. "These are damning," she said finally. "Direct evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. More than enough to have Edmund arrested." "Then we move now," Adrian said. "We take this to the authorities." "No," Alara spoke quietly but firmly. "Not yet." They all turned to look at her. "If we arrest Edmund now, he'll claim ignorance. Say these letters are forgeries. Use his connections to muddy everything." She looked at Garrett. "You said he's planning something for the dinner party. Let him try. Let him show his hand. We'll be ready, and we'll have witnesses, undeniable proof." "You want to use yourself as bait," Adrian said flatly. "I want to end this once and for all, not with legal battles that could drag on for years, but definitively, publicly, so everyone sees exactly what Edmund is." "It's too dangerous." "It's the only way to be sure." Alara met his eyes. "You said this was my justice to claim. I'm claiming it." The Dowager Duchess was nodding slowly. "She's right." "A failed assassination attempt at a public event with witnesses?" "Edmund couldn't talk his way out of that. And we'd have him on attempted murder, not just conspiracy. And if something goes wrong?" Adrian demanded. If we can't stop whatever he's planning in time, then we make sure we can. Alara turned to Garrett. You'll help us. Tell us exactly what Edmund's planning, every detail you know. I don't know much, just that he's hired someone, a professional. They're supposed to make it look like an accident. That's enough. The Dowager Duchess was already moving toward her desk. We have 3 days, we'll increase security at the dinner party, have armed men positioned throughout the house, and we'll control every variable we can. And the variables we can't control? Adrian asked. We improvise. Alara smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. Edmund thinks we're weak, thinks we'll crumble under pressure. Let's show him exactly how wrong he is. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation that had nothing to do with flowers and menus. The Dowager Duchess quietly hired additional security, former soldiers, men who knew how to watch for threats. Adrian met with his solicitor to ensure all the evidence they'd gathered was properly documented and secured. And Alara planned a dinner party that would either be her triumph or her funeral. The night of the event arrived with unseasonable warmth. Guests began arriving at 7, filling Ravencroft House with the sound of conversation and laughter. Alara stood in the receiving line in a gown of deep emerald silk, Adrian at her side, and greeted each arrival with perfect grace. Edmund and Charlotte arrived fashionably late. Edmund's smile was all teeth as he bowed over Alara's hand. Duchess, he said, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard. How brave of you to host an event so soon after such unfortunate revelations. I do admire resilience. I'm sure you do, Alara replied evenly, though I find that resilience is often mistaken for simple refusal to surrender. An easy error to make. Something flickered in Edmund's eyes, surprise perhaps, or wariness. He moved on into the drawing room, Charlotte trailing behind him with a smirk that didn't quite hide her uncertainty. Lady Caroline arrived and immediately sought out Alara. You look absolutely lethal, darling. Is that intentional? Completely. Excellent. I position myself where I can see everything. Consider me your witness to whatever spectacle you're planning. The dinner itself was flawless. Alara had arranged the seating with surgical precision, Edmund placed where he could be easily observed, surrounded by guests who'd proven themselves sharp-eyed and gossipy. If something happened, there would be no shortage of people ready to discuss it afterward. The conversation flowed, wine was poured, and beneath the pleasant surface, Alara felt the tension coiling tighter with each passing minute. It was during the 4th course that she noticed it. A footman she didn't recognize moving along the edge of the dining room with a wine decanter. His movements were too careful, too measured, and when he reached for Alara's glass, his hand trembled slightly. She caught Adrian's eye across the table, saw the moment he noticed the same thing. He gave an almost imperceptible nod to someone Alara couldn't see. The footman poured wine into her glass, set down the decanter, and moved toward the kitchen. He was intercepted before he reached the door. 2 of the Dowager Duchess's men, dressed as servants, caught him by the arms with swift efficiency. The dining room went silent. Unhand me, the footman sputtered. I'm simply doing my duties. Then you won't mind if we test that wine you just poured, Adrian said calmly, standing. He picked up Alara's glass and handed it to one of the men. Take it to Dr. Morrison. Have it analyzed immediately. The footman's face drained of color. Edmund, seated halfway down the table, had gone very still. Really, Adrian, he said, his tone light but his eyes hard. This is quite dramatic. Surely you don't think someone's trying to poison your wife at your own dinner party? I think, Adrian said quietly, that someone has tried and failed to poison my wife, and I think we're about to find out exactly who hired them to do it. The footman broke then, struggling against the men holding him. I was just following orders. He said it would just make her sick, not kill her. He said... Who said? The Dowager Duchess demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Edmund Ravencroft. He paid me to put something in the Duchess's wine. Said it would cause a miscarriage, make it look natural. The room erupted. Gasps, exclamations, chairs scraping back as guests stood. Edmund lunged to his feet, his expression twisted with fury. That's a lie. I never... This is some scheme, some performance they've arranged. Is it? Adrian's voice was lethal. Then you won't mind if we search you for the vial of poison this man claims you gave him? This is outrageous. I demand... Adrian moved. Fast enough that Edmund couldn't dodge, he seized his cousin by the collar and began searching his pockets. Edmund struggled, shouting protests, but Adrian was stronger and far more motivated. His hand emerged holding a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. The silence was absolute. "Well," Lady Caroline said into the shocked quiet, "that's certainly damning evidence." Edmund's face had gone from red to white. He looked around the room wildly, seeing only condemnation in every face. His gaze landed on Charlotte, who was backing away slowly, her expression horrified. "This is a setup," Edmund said desperately. "They planted that. This entire dinner was designed to frame me." "Actually," the Dowager Duchess said, standing with regal authority, "this dinner was designed to give you enough rope to hang yourself, which you've done admirably." She gestured to the men holding the footman. "Take him to the authorities, along with Mr. Ravencroft. I believe attempted murder carries a rather severe penalty." "You can't do this," Edmund snarled. "I'm family. I have rights." "You have the right to face justice for your crimes," Adrian said coldly, "which include drugging my wife, arranging her assault, attempting to poison her, and conspiring to commit murder. We have witnesses. We have evidence. And now we have you caught in the act." Edmund looked around the room one last time, seeing his social death written in every shocked face. Then he lunged, not toward the door, but toward Alara. He didn't make it 3 steps. Adrian intercepted him, driving him back with a punch that sent Edmund sprawling. The Dowager Duchess's men were on him immediately, hauling him to his feet with his arms locked behind his back. "Take him away," the Dowager Duchess ordered. "And someone please summon the constable. We have quite a lot to discuss with the authorities." As Edmund was dragged from the room, still shouting denials and threats, Alara felt Adrian's hand find hers beneath the table. She squeezed tight, her heart hammering but her head clear. They'd done it. They'd exposed Edmund completely, publicly, with witnesses who would spread the story across London by morning. "Well," Lady Caroline said into the stunned silence, "that was considerably more entertaining than I anticipated. Duchess, you throw an excellent party. Will there be dessert, or should we consider the attempted poisoning the final course?" Despite everything, Alara laughed. "There will absolutely be dessert. We're civilized people, after all." The dinner continued, though the conversation now centered entirely on Edmund's spectacular downfall. Guests stayed late into the evening, reluctant to leave the scene of such dramatic scandal. By the time the last of them departed, Alara was exhausted but triumphant. Adrian found her in the library afterward, staring into the fire. "You were incredible tonight," he said quietly. "The way you stayed calm while Edmund was being arrested. The way you turned his attempted murder into a social event no one will ever forget." "We were incredible," Alara corrected. "All of us. Your mother's planning, your courage, my stubbornness. We made a rather effective team." "Yes." Adrian crossed to her, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "We did. And I have no intention of this team disbanding after a year." "Neither do I." He kissed her then, and it was different from before. Not desperate or fierce, but sure. A promise and a beginning wrapped into one. When they finally broke apart, Alara smiled up at him. "We should probably discuss the child, and what comes next, and how we're going to actually manage being married to each other for real instead of pretend." "Tomorrow," Adrian said, kissing her forehead. "Tonight, let's just appreciate that we're alive. Edmund's going to prison, and we won." "We did win, didn't we?" "Completely." They stood together in the firelight, the house quiet around them, and for the first time since this whole impossible arrangement began, Alara felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Real, solid, unshakable hope for the future. They stood together in the firelight, the house quiet around them, and for the first time since this whole impossible arrangement began, Alara felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Real, solid, unshakable hope for the future. But hope, she'd learned, required work to sustain. The morning after Edmund's arrest brought a deluge of calling cards, letters, and visitors that threatened to overwhelm even the Dowager Duchess's formidable organizational skills. London society, having witnessed Edmund Ravencroft dragged from a dinner party in handcuffs, was ravenous for details. Alara sat in the morning room reviewing correspondence while Dr. Morrison examined her. The spotting had stopped completely, and he pronounced both her and the baby healthy, though he insisted she continue to rest as much as possible. The stress of recent events could have caused complications, he said, packing his instruments with careful precision. The fact that you've remained stable suggests a strong constitution, both yours and the child's. After he left, Adrian appeared with breakfast on a tray, a gesture so unexpected that Alara simply stared. "What?" he asked, setting it down on the table beside her. "I'm capable of carrying food up a staircase." "I know that. I'm just surprised you did." "I'm full of surprises." He settled into the chair across from her, his own coffee in hand. "The constable wants to speak with us this afternoon. Formal statements about Edmund's attempted poisoning and everything that led to it." "And the other matter? The assault?" Adrian's expression darkened. "They're investigating." Pemberton's confession gave them enough to question several of Edmund's associates. One of them broke last night, gave up a name. Alara's hand stilled on the teacup. "Who?" "A man named Richard Talbot. Minor nobility, massive gambling debts. Edmund owned his markers and called them in with a favor." Adrian's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. "He's already fled London. The authorities are searching for him, but he had a 12-hour head start." The name meant nothing to Alara. She'd never met Richard Talbot, would never recognize his face. This stranger had violated her while she lay unconscious, created a child neither of them would raise, and now he was running. "Do you want them to find him?" Adrian asked quietly. It was the same question he'd asked before, phrased differently. "What do you want? What would serve your justice?" Alara thought about it carefully. The violation, the pregnancy, the fear and confusion of not knowing what had happened to her own body. She could want vengeance, could demand Talbot face the fullest extent of the law, be punished as brutally as possible, but what she actually wanted was simpler and more complex. "I want him caught," she said finally. "I want him to face trial. I want it on record what he did so he can never claim innocence or hide behind Edmund's protection. But after that?" She met Adrian's eyes. "I want to forget he exists. This child deserves better than to be defined by how it was conceived." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Relief and respect and something deeper. "Then that's what we'll arrange. The authorities will continue searching. When they find him, he'll face justice. And we'll move forward." "We?" Alara smiled slightly. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. You're not doing this alone anymore." Adrian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Alara, I know we started this as a business arrangement. A year of marriage in exchange for security and inheritance. But somewhere along the way, that changed for me. This isn't pretend anymore. It hasn't been for a while." "No," she agreed softly. "It hasn't. So I have a proposal. A new arrangement, if you will." His mouth quirked. "We tear up the original contract, the 1-year term, the planned annulment, all of it, and we build something real instead. A genuine marriage. A genuine partnership. Not because we're obligated to, but because we choose to." Alara's heart was hammering. "And the inheritance? The conditions of your grandfather's will?" "Secured as of yesterday. I'm married, the requirements are met, and the fortune transfers to me within the month." Adrian's expression was wry. "Which means the only reason to stay married now is if we actually want to be." "Do you? Want to be?" "Yes." The word was immediate, certain. "I want to build a life with you, raise this child together, face whatever comes next as partners instead of strangers playing roles." He paused. "But only if that's what you want too. If you'd prefer to maintain distance, to keep this practical and strategic, I'll respect that. The choice is yours." Alara looked at this man she'd married for money and survival. This man who'd defended her, protected her, seen her at her worst and her most desperate, and decided she was worth fighting for. This man who was offering her not just security, but genuine partnership. The choice should have been difficult, should have required careful consideration and practical analysis. Instead, it was the easiest decision she'd ever made. "I want the real thing too," she said. "The genuine marriage, the partnership, all of it." Adrian's smile transformed his face. He stood, crossed to her chair, and pulled her to her feet. Then he kissed her with a thoroughness that made her knees weak and her pulse race. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Fair warning, I'm not easy to live with. I'm stubborn, I work too much, and I have strong opinions about everything from politics to breakfast. I'm difficult, proud, and I refuse to be managed or controlled. Perfect. We'll drive each other absolutely mad. Probably, Laura laughed. But at least we'll do it honestly. The constable arrived that afternoon, a stern man named Inspector Davies who took their statements with meticulous care. Alara recounted everything, the engagement ball, the dizziness, the fragments of memory. Adrian detailed Edmund's escalating threats and the evidence they'd gathered. The Dowager Duchess provided documentation that painted a damning picture of Edmund's criminal conspiracy. This is quite comprehensive, Inspector Davies said, reviewing the files. With Pemberton's confession, Garrett's testimony, and last night's attempted poisoning witnessed by 30 guests, we have more than enough to convict Mr. Edmund Ravencroft on multiple charges. He'll be facing significant prison time. And Talbot? Alara asked. We have constables searching every port and coaching station. He can't hide forever. The inspector's expression was grave. I want you to understand, Your Grace, that what happened to you was a serious crime. Regardless of the pregnancy, regardless of the marriage, what Talbot did was assault. You were violated, and that deserves justice. The acknowledgement, official and clear, made something loosen in Alara's chest. Thank you, Inspector, for taking this seriously. It's my duty, and my pleasure, in this case. He stood, gathering his papers. I'll keep you informed of developments. In the meantime, I'd suggest maintaining security here. Edmund has associates who may try to retaliate. After he left, the Dowager Duchess appeared with the evening papers. You're going to want to see these. The headlines were spectacular. Duke's cousin arrested for attempted murder. Poison plot exposed at society dinner. Ravencroft scandal deepens as criminal conspiracy revealed. But it was the editorial in the Times that caught Alara's attention. Written by Lady Caroline Ashford under her gossip column pseudonym, it read, Society has watched the Duke and Duchess of Ashmont with voyeuristic fascination since their engagement was announced. Many assumed theirs was a marriage of convenience, a ruined family's daughter trading desperation for security. Last night's events proved how catastrophically wrong those assumptions were. What we witnessed was not a fortune hunter grasping for status, but a woman of remarkable courage facing down a criminal conspiracy with intelligence and grace. The Duchess of Ashmont, far from being the social climber London assumed, revealed herself to be precisely the kind of person our aristocracy needs: sharp, strategic, and utterly unwilling to be victimized. As for Edmund Ravencroft, whose schemes and crimes have now been exposed in spectacular fashion, one can only hope his prison cell is as uncomfortable as his presence at society events always was. Alara read it twice, something warm expanding in her chest. Public vindication. Public acknowledgement of what she'd survived and how she'd fought back. Caroline's ruthless when she wants to be, the Dowager Duchess observed, but fair, and she's shaped the narrative before the gossips can twist it into something uglier. Over the next weeks, that narrative solidified. London society, always hungry for drama, embraced the story of the Duchess who'd outsmarted a villain. Invitations poured in, not the cautious social climbing kind from before, but genuine offers of friendship and respect. Alara accepted some and declined others, learning to navigate society not as an outsider desperate for acceptance, but as a duchess who set her own terms. She attended the opera with Adrian, hosted intimate dinners for carefully selected guests, and slowly built a circle of genuine allies. Lady Caroline became a regular visitor, her sharp wit and political connections proving invaluable. Other women began seeking Alara's advice on everything from household management to navigating difficult family situations. Without intending to, she became a kind of mentor to other women trying to find their footing in London's ruthless social world. You've become influential, Adrian observed one evening as they reviewed yet another stack of invitations. People listen when you speak. Seek your approval. That's power, Alara. It's responsibility, she corrected, and I'm still learning how to wield it. You're doing remarkably well. He set down the invitation he'd been reading and looked at her seriously. I have something to tell you about the child. Alara's hand went instinctively to her stomach, now beginning to show a slight curve. What about it? I've been thinking about what you said, about the child deserving better than to be defined by how it was conceived. Adrian took her hand. I want to legally adopt this baby. Make it mine in every legal sense. Not just socially or practically, but officially. So there's never any question about legitimacy or inheritance or rights. Adrian, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. This child will be raised as a Ravencroft, loved as a Ravencroft, and I'll be its father in every way that matters. His grip tightened on her hand. If that's acceptable to you. Alara felt tears prick her eyes. More than acceptable. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is selfish on my part. Adrian smiled. I'm going to love this child, Alara. Already do, in a way. And I want every legal protection in place to ensure no one can ever take it from us or use its origins as a weapon. The adoption was arranged quietly through Adrian's solicitor. By the time Alara entered her 4th month of pregnancy, the papers were signed and filed. The child would be born a Ravencroft, with all the protections and privileges that name carried. Edmund's trial took place in early autumn. The courtroom was packed with spectators, eager to see the downfall of a man who terrorized and manipulated his way through society. Alara attended every day of testimony, Adrian beside her, listening as witness after witness detailed Edmund's crimes. Pemberton testified about the drugging at the engagement ball. Garrett described the murder conspiracy. The footman explained the poison plot. And through it all, Edmund sat with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief that his plans had failed so completely. When the verdict came, guilty on all charges, Alara felt no triumph, only relief that it was finally over. Edmund was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Charlotte divorced him within the month and disappeared to the continent, her social reputation in ruins. Richard Talbot was caught 3 weeks later trying to board a ship to America. His trial was quicker, the evidence overwhelming. Alara attended that verdict too, wanting to see the man who'd violated her face consequences. When he was sentenced to 15 years, she stood, looked him directly in the eye, and said clearly, I hope you spend every day of those 15 years understanding exactly what you took from me and how completely you failed to break me. Then she walked out of the courtroom with her head high, Adrian's hand warm in hers, and didn't look back. Winter arrived with unusual gentleness. Alara's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body adjusting to the changes with resilient efficiency. She and Adrian settled into domestic routines that felt both natural and novel. Breakfast debates about politics, quiet evenings in the library, long walks through the estate grounds when the weather permitted. Margaret visited frequently, her health much improved thanks to consistent medical care. She'd begun studying with a tutor the Dowager Duchess had hired, showing a remarkable aptitude for mathematics and science. You've changed, Margaret observed one afternoon as they sat together in the drawing room, Alara knitting baby clothes with determined incompetence. Have I? You're not hiding anymore, not making yourself small or invisible. Margaret smiled. You take up space now. Command it. It was true. Somewhere between the ballroom confrontation with Lady Weatherby and Edmund's arrest, Alara had stopped apologizing for her existence, had stopped trying to be forgettable. Now she walked into rooms expecting respect, and more often than not, received it. I learned I could survive anything, Alara said quietly. That's a powerful realization. Christmas was celebrated at Ravencroft House with more warmth than the estate had seen in years. The Dowager Duchess orchestrated festivities with military precision, inviting family friends and business associates for a week of parties and celebrations. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell outside and fires crackled in every hearth, Adrian found Alara in the nursery they'd been preparing. She stood by the window, one hand on her very round stomach, watching the snow. The baby's active tonight, she said as he joined her. I think all the noise from the party is stimulating. Adrian placed his hand beside hers, feeling the movement beneath. Strong, like its mother. Or stubborn, like its father. Both. He turned her to face him. I have something for you, a Christmas gift. Adrian, We agreed no extravagant presents. This isn't extravagant, just important. He pulled a document from his jacket. It's the deed to your father's old house, the one you grew up in. I bought it back, had it restored. It's yours now, legally, completely. Alara stared at the paper, tears welling. The house her father had lost, the home she'd been forced to leave. Adrian had bought it back, given it to her. Not as a grand gesture, but as an acknowledgement of what she'd lost and survived. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep it as a reminder of how far you've come, or give it to Margaret someday, or sell it if you'd rather. It's yours to do with as you choose. Adrian brushed a tear from her cheek. You've spent so long losing things, Alara. I wanted to give something back. She kissed him then, deep and grateful, and full of the love she'd stopped trying to deny. When they broke apart, she was smiling through tears. Thank you for this, for everything, for seeing me when no one else did. I see you, Adrian said simply, and I love what I see. The baby was born on a freezing February morning, arriving 3 weeks early with a lusty cry that echoed through Ravencroft House. A girl, small but healthy, with dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into Adrian's gray. Alara, exhausted and exhilarated, held her daughter and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. This tiny person, created in violence but born into love, represented everything she'd fought for: survival, transformation, the stubborn refusal to let circumstances define her. What should we name her? Adrian asked, his voice rough with emotion as he held his daughter for the first time. Alara had thought about this for months, had considered family names and traditional choices, but in the end, there was only one name that felt right. Hope, she said. We'll call her Hope, because that's what she represents. Adrian's eyes shimmered. Hope Ravencroft, it's perfect. The Dowager Duchess entered with Margaret close behind, both eager to meet the newest family member. Margaret held Hope with surprising confidence, cooing nonsense, while the baby stared up at her with solemn focus. She's beautiful, Margaret whispered, and so small. Was I ever this small? You were, Alara confirmed, and just as determined. I can already tell Hope has opinions about everything. She's a Ravencroft, the Dowager Duchess said with satisfaction. Of course she has opinions. As winter gave way to spring, life at Ravencroft House settled into new rhythms. Hope proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping in decent stretches and favoring anyone who would hold her. Adrian was completely besotted, often found in the nursery at odd hours just watching her sleep. I never thought I'd be a father, he admitted one night as they prepared for bed. Never wanted the responsibility, but now I can't imagine life without her. Neither can I. Alara settled against the pillows, tired but content. Though I could imagine getting more than 3 hours of consecutive sleep. She'll get there. Dr. Morrison says she's developing perfectly. I know. I'm not complaining. Just... Alara smiled, acknowledging that parenthood is harder than I anticipated. And more rewarding? Infinitely. By the time Hope turned 6 months old, the scandal that had defined Alara and Adrian's early marriage had faded into old news. London society had moved on to fresh gossip, fresh drama. But the changes the scandal had wrought remained. Alara was no longer the desperate fortune hunter from a ruined family. She was the Duchess of Ashmont, intelligent, formidable, and possessed of an origin story that made her simultaneously sympathetic and intimidating. Women sought her counsel. Men sought Adrian's business partnerships, hoping proximity would grant them access to the Duchess's influence. And the Ravencroft name, already powerful, had gained new dimensions. Not just wealth and title, but resilience. The family that had faced down criminal conspiracy and emerged stronger. One afternoon in late summer, Alara was working in her private study. She'd claimed one of the smaller rooms for her charitable work and correspondence, when a visitor was announced. Lord Hartwell, the man whose fraudulent lawsuit Edmund had weaponized to drain Adrian's resources. Alara considered refusing to see him, but curiosity won out. Show him in. Hartwell was perhaps 60, gray-haired and distinguished, with the kind of face that suggested a lifetime of careful political navigation. He entered her study and bowed deeply. Your Grace, thank you for seeing me. Lord Hartwell, I assume you're here about the lawsuit. Yes, and to apologize. He met her eyes directly. I was manipulated by Edmund Ravencroft, convinced that the Duke had genuinely defrauded me. By the time I realized Edmund was using me as a pawn in his schemes, the damage was done, and yet you withdrew the suit only after Edmund was arrested. To my shame, yes, I should have questioned his motives earlier, should have investigated more thoroughly. Hartwell's expression was pained. I wanted to tell you and the Duke personally that I regret my role in Edmund's conspiracy, and to offer my support going forward in whatever capacity you'll accept it. Elara studied him carefully. His regret seemed genuine, but she'd learned to be cautious about accepting apologies without understanding motivation. Why now? She asked. Edmund's been in prison for months. Why come forward now? Because I'm dying, Hartwell said simply. Cancer. The physicians give me perhaps 6 months, and I find I don't want to meet my end carrying the weight of having harmed innocent people. He smiled wryly. Call it deathbed conscience if you like, but it's sincere. The blunt honesty was unexpected and strangely refreshing. Elara made a decision. I accept your apology, Lord Hartwell, and I'll inform the Duke of your visit. As for support, there's a charitable foundation I'm establishing for women escaping difficult circumstances. If you're looking to make amends, a donation would be welcome. Hartwell's relief was visible. Consider it done. Thank you, Your Grace, for your graciousness. After he left, Elara sat for a long moment thinking about forgiveness and second chances, about how people could be manipulated into cruelty without recognizing it, about the importance of offering grace when it was genuinely sought. She'd become someone who could afford to be generous. That was power of a different kind. That evening, she told Adrian about Hartwell's visit. They were in the library, their favorite room, with Hope sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside them. Do you think he was sincere? Adrian asked. I do. And even if he wasn't, accepting his apology costs us nothing and potentially gains us an ally's support for the Foundation. You're thinking strategically. Adrian's tone was approving. My mother would be proud. Your mother taught me well. Elara set down her book. Adrian, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it, the arrangement we made, everything that happened because of it? Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. I regret that you were hurt, that you had to endure violation and scandal. I regret Edmund's cruelty and my grandfather's manipulation. He reached for her hand. But regret the arrangement itself? Regret that it brought you into my life? Never. Not for a second. Even though it started with desperation and strategy? Especially because of that. We built something real from impossible circumstances. That's more meaningful than any fairy tale romance. Adrian lifted her hand to his lips. You were brave enough to gamble everything on a stranger's offer. I was desperate enough to accept my mother's scheme. And somehow, against all probability, we found each other. Elara leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. I love you. I don't think I've said that clearly enough. You have, but I never tire of hearing it. Adrian kissed her temple. I love you too, more than I thought myself capable of loving anyone. Hope made a small sound in her sleep, one tiny fist waving. They both turned to watch her, this child who represented transformation and resilience. She's going to be formidable, Elara said softly, with your stubbornness and my refusal to surrender. The world won't know what hit it. Good. Let it be unprepared. She'll conquer it anyway. Years passed with the steady accumulation of ordinary moments that built extraordinary lives. Hope grew into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions and refused to accept incomplete answers. Margaret, now 20, had become a respected tutor herself, teaching mathematics to young women from families who'd finally recognized that education had value regardless of gender. Elara's charitable foundation flourished, helping hundreds of women escape poverty, abuse, and desperate circumstances. She never forgot what desperation felt like, never forgot standing in a ballroom with nothing left to lose. And she made sure other women in similar positions had options beyond impossible gambles. Adrian's business ventures expanded, but he'd learned to balance work with family. He taught Hope to ride, read her stories about brave adventurers and clever heroines, and never once suggested she should limit her ambitions because of her gender. The Dowager Duchess, now in her 70s, remained as sharp and formidable as ever. She'd taken to calling Hope "my legacy," much to the child's delight and occasional exasperation. On Hope's 5th birthday, they held a garden party at the estate. The grounds were full of children and parents, laughter and chaos and joy. Alara stood on the terrace watching Hope organize her friends into some elaborate game with complex rules only she fully understood. "She's exactly like you," Adrian said, joining her with 2 glasses of champagne. "She's exactly like both of us. Stubborn, strategic, and absolutely certain she can accomplish anything." Terrifying combination. Powerful combination. Alara accepted the glass, clinking it against his. "To our daughter. May she never have to bargain for survival the way I did." "She won't. We've made sure of that." Adrian wrapped his arm around her waist. "Do you ever think about that night? The engagement ball? What you'd tell yourself if you could go back?" Alara considered this. "I'd tell myself to trust my instincts, that the seemingly impossible choice is sometimes the right one, that survival is just the beginning, not the ending." She smiled. "And I'd tell myself that the cold, stubborn Duke I was about to meet would become the love of my life." "You couldn't have known that then." "No, but I'd have liked the reassurance during the terrifying parts." Lady Caroline approached, her own children in tow. "Your daughter just informed mine that girls can be knights and pirates and prime ministers, and anyone who says otherwise is factually incorrect." She was grinning. "I think I love her." "She's learned from observation," Alara said wryly. "I may have mentioned a few times that social limitations are artificially constructed and therefore mutable. You're creating a generation of revolutionaries. I'm creating a generation of women who refuse to accept limits they didn't choose. There's a difference." Caroline laughed and headed back toward the games, leaving Alara and Adrian alone again. "You've changed London," Adrian observed. "Maybe not the whole city, but our corner of it. The women you've mentored, the families you've helped, they're different because of you." "We're different because of each other," Alara corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without your support, your willingness to let me be more than just a duchess managing a household. You were always going to be more than that. I just had the good sense not to try stopping you." Hope came running up, breathless and grass-stained. "Mama, Papa, we need another table for the feast and more cakes. We're having a celebration because I defeated the dragon." "What dragon?" Adrian asked, perfectly serious. "The imaginary one that was threatening the castle. It's very important." Hope looked at them with 5-year-old intensity. "Can we have more cakes?" "We can have more cakes," Alara confirmed. "But first, explain the dragon's motivation. Why was it threatening the castle?" Hope launched into an elaborate explanation involving territorial disputes and misunderstood intentions. Adrian caught Alara's eye over their daughter's head, his expression full of amused love. This was their life now. Not a strategic arrangement or a marriage of convenience, but a genuine family built from impossible circumstances. Not perfect. They still argued about politics and parenting and 1,000 small things, but real and chosen and fiercely protected. As the sun set over the garden party and Hope led her small army of friends in a victory parade around the grounds, Alara felt the weight of how far she'd come. From the invisible girl hiding behind flowers at a ball to the Duchess, commanding respect and wielding influence. From desperate and powerless to secure and strategic. But more than that, from alone to beloved. "Thank you," she said quietly to Adrian. "For what?" "For seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me." Adrian pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for taking the impossible gamble, for walking into that ballroom with nothing to lose, for being brave enough to say yes when my mother made her outrageous proposal. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Adrian corrected. "The best was deciding to make it real." They stood together watching their daughter, their family, their improbable life as the last light faded from the summer sky. The woman who'd once been invisible had become unforgettable. The man who'd sworn he'd never marry had become a devoted husband and father. and the contract that should have ended after a year had transformed into a legacy that would endure for generations. Hope ran to them again, grabbing both their hands. "Come on! The victory feast is starting! You can't miss the victory feast!" They let themselves be dragged toward the celebration, laughing. And as Alara looked around at the life she'd built from desperation and determination, she realized something fundamental. She'd entered that ballroom with nothing left to lose. She was leaving this garden party with everything she'd never known she could gain. Not just survival, not just security, but love, partnership, family purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The Duchess bargain had become something neither she nor Adrian had anticipated. Not a transaction, but a transformation. Not an ending, but a beginning that would echo through all the years to come. And standing there in the golden evening light, Hope's small hand warm in hers, and Adrian's presence solid at her side, Alara knew with absolute certainty that every impossible choice, every terrifying moment, every desperate gamble had been worth it. She'd walked into that ballroom invisible. She'd become unforgettable, and she'd done it by refusing to surrender, refusing to hide, and always choosing, to fight for the life she deserved rather than accept the one circumstances had dealt her. That was her legacy. That was Hope's inheritance. And that was the truth London society would remember long after the scandals faded and the gossip moved on. The Duchess of Ashmont had entered the game with nothing and won everything. Not because she was lucky, not because she was rescued, but because she was brave enough to bet on herself when no one else would. And that made all the difference.